In 1977, Star Wars burst onto the screen like nothing before it. A modern fairy tale wrapped in the thrills of Saturday matinee serials, igniting imaginations around the world. In 1980, The Empire Strikes Back took that story to a darker, more complex place, leaving its heroes broken and its audience desperate for answers. But the conclusion to the trilogy wouldn't be straightforward. Star Wars creator George Lucas faced an enormous creative crossroad. Should Star Wars continue down the path of moral ambiguity, blurring the lines between good and evil, or circle back to the mythic simplicity of its roots? Would the trilogy end with revenge or with redemption? For Lucas, the production of Return of the Jedi would prove to be the most turbulent and perhaps most revealing chapter of his career. August 1980. Under the blistering Tunisian sun, George Lucas stood on the set of his new film, Raiders of the Lost Ark. The Tunisian desert soared above 50 degrees, doubling as the Egyptian dig sites where Steven Spielberg orchestrated a chaotic, dust-choked shoot. But for Lucas, his mind was already elsewhere. Instead of basking in the success of The Empire Strikes Back, Lucas felt the weight of expectation for the trilogy's conclusion. While Spielberg and Harrison Ford debated over a scene, Lucas pulled aside Raiders producer, Howard Kazanjian. In the middle of the desert, they began quietly laying the first bricks of what would become the conclusion to the Star Wars trilogy. Empire was a commercial success, but had spiraled into a nightmare behind the scenes. Way over budget, plagued with delays, and leaving Lucas financially and emotionally drained. Empire's producer, Gary Kurtz, parted ways with Lucasfilm in the fallout. Lucas was determined not to repeat that chaos, and so turned to Kazanjian, whose reputation for discipline and efficiency made him the perfect candidate to keep the third film on time and on budget. I had sets gathering dust, I was paying rent, and my actors were getting older and were vulnerable to accidents. Over such a long period of time, anything could happen. Creatively, I wanted it to be finished and perfect, so there's a lot of tension there all the time. I have to finish this next film. Financially, we have to do it. For Lucas, this film wasn't just the finale to his saga, it was a race against time, money, and his own exhaustion. In an admitted moment of weakness, Lucas was even toying with the idea of just selling the rights of Star Wars to Fox, taking the money and running. But when the time came for me to turn it over, I'd fallen in love with it. I want these three films to have unity because it's one story. I knew I had to be here to keep the look of it consistent, the art direction consistent, the technology consistent. I knew I had to finish this particular film working with these particular actors for the last time. Returning from the Raiders set, Lucas began sketching the first threads of the story. At this stage, it was nothing more than scribbled notes and half-formed ideas. The Emperor's evil lair hidden underneath the Imperial capital, Hab Abaddon, a return to Tatooine, and the introduction of furry forest creatures called Ewoks. Meanwhile, Kazanjian was tasked with finding the film's director. Lucas remained adamant that he would not return to directing, preferring the role of executive producer and overseer. The simple solution for Lucas was to just rehire Empire's director, Irvin Kershner. But when he declined the offer, wanting instead to move on to his own projects, the search grew more complicated than expected. The problem wasn't just creative, it was political.
Oh mate, don't say that!
Lucas had resigned from both the Writers and Directors Guild of America after a bitter dispute over Empire. The Guild had insisted that opening Empire with a Lucasfilm production effectively gave Lucas a director's credit at the head of the film. Lucas argued that it was simply the name of the company. The fallout meant that hiring a new director and even a new writer was now fraught with complications. But Lucas couldn't afford to linger. There was no script, no director, and the train was already running out of tracks. So, in late 1980, Lucasfilm issued a press release announcing that the third film, Revenge of the Jedi, was slated for release in 1983. The clock was ticking. Locking himself away, Lucas began to flesh out a full-length script. Slowly, the key pieces emerged. Jabba the Hutt, ominously referenced in the previous two films, would finally appear on screen. The Ewoks became Ewoks, inspired by the indigenous Miwok tribe of Northern California, and the confrontation between Luke, Vader, and the Emperor began to take shape. Still, by this early stage, the script was skeletal, with Act 3 in particular having only 6 of its 15 scenes even outlined. Lucas, who had always seen writing as a begrudging necessity, needed a writer to help refine the story. Ideally, long-term collaborator and writer of Empire, Lawrence Kasdan. But Kasdan's membership to the Writers Guild made it impossible for him to collaborate with the banished Lucas. But Lucas had just enough to hand off to his visual effects team at Industrial Light and Magic. For ILM and Star Wars veterans Joe Johnston, Nilo Rodis Jamero, and Ralph McQuarrie, Lucas gave free rein. There were no scene breakdowns or any specific instructions, just a simple task: design. When Lucas was stopped by the art department, he would either ignore the work entirely or mark it with a red G, signalling that the idea should be pursued further. Meanwhile, Kazanjian's search for a director became exhausting. For over a year, he screened films from countless candidates, deciphering whether they had the ability to handle production of this scale. The prerequisites were clear. The director had to be able to carry forward the style established by Lucas and Kirshner, have a strong sense of humour, imagination, craft, and, perhaps most importantly, the stamina to wrangle an army of visual effects shots. Lucas and Kazanjian weren't looking for auteurs who might impose their own vision. They wanted someone young, adaptable, and willing to operate within the framework Lucas had built. To put it bluntly, they wanted a yes man. Among the names floated were Peter Weir, Alan Parker, and most intriguingly, David Lynch. At the time, Lynch was a rising star in Hollywood. His debut film, Eraserhead, had cemented him as a cult visionary, and his follow-up, The Elephant Man, had just earned him critical acclaim and Academy Award nominations. Out of admiration, Lynch accepted Lucas's invitation to California, and what followed has since become infamous. After a brief meeting at Lucasfilm, Lynch was given a tour of ILM. However, what was meant to inspire and awe was instead overwhelming. The sheer scale of the production, rows of models, racks of storyboards, whole sequences being pre-visualized, gave Lynch what he would describe as a mounting headache that swelled into a full migraine. Now, the accounts diverge after this point. Lucas maintains that the choice came down to two names, Lynch and Richard Marquand. He claims he chose Lynch first, but within 3 days, Lynch withdrew, partly due to his Directors Guild membership and partly because he soon committed to a different sci-fi film, Dune, or Dune. Dune. Dunest of Dunes is Dune. Dune. Yeah, that can stay in. Lynch, however, tells it differently. He says that even before leaving California, he phoned his agent and said, "I just can't do it." He later told Lucas directly that Star Wars was his story to finish, and that he should direct it himself. With Lynch out of the picture, Lucas turned to the director who seemed to fit his vision best, Richard Marquand. Born in Wales, Marquand had built his career in television documentaries for the BBC, eventually directing Birth of the Beatles, a TV film about the band's early years. It wasn't until Lucas saw Marquand's most recent film, the World War II thriller Eye of the Needle, that he was convinced. The film's moody, precise visual style impressed him, and Lucas invited Marquand to Skywalker Ranch. There, he gave him a tour of ILM's facilities, introduced him to the post-production department, and laid out the scale of the task ahead. Marquand seemed to get it, and when offered the role of director by Lucas, he quickly snapped up the opportunity, celebrating by falling into a pool with a bottle of champagne. At ILM, meanwhile, the company was struggling under the weight of its own success. Having just won its latest Academy Award for The Empire Strikes Back, ILM was suddenly the most in-demand effects house in the industry. However, the flip side of that meant that the company was incredibly overworked. Before they could even turn their full attention to Revenge of the Jedi, they were already committed to Poltergeist, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, and Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. To try and cope, ILM split into competing units, each fighting to outdo the other, each arguing over who deserved more of the budget. Lucas, however, simply just didn't have the time to consider these consequences. He instead had his eye on another defining aspect of the film, the monsters. Disappointed with Empire's relative lack of creatures, especially compared to the original Star Wars, Lucas was determined to make up for it. He pushed the final chapter to go all in on aliens and puppetry. Inside Lucasfilm, the project even earned the nickname the Monster Movie. From Jabba the Hutt to Admiral Akbar, 2 full creature shops, one in the US, one in the UK, were each tasked with building 53 new creations in just 6 months, all while crucially staying on budget. The mandate from up top was blunt: get it done. But the logistics were punishing. Kazanjian pushed to start filming in January 1982, months earlier than many felt comfortable. For everyone involved, it was a constant race against the clock. And yet, one design proved more difficult than all the others: the Ewoks. More than 300 sketches were generated, ranging from mischievous gnomes to hulking bear-like figures. Each time Lucas reviewed the artwork, his note was the same: make them cuter. I kind of picked up the direction he was heading, and I did one so cute, it looked like the teddy bear's picnic. It had little ears and was wearing a little bonnet. George came in the next day and said, "That's it, we'll kill him with cuteness." To Lucas, 3 elements of the film were non-negotiable: Jabba the Hutt, the Ewoks, and Luke's final confrontation with the Emperor. He insisted that by removing any of them, the film would collapse. The Ewoks were not only an allegory for the Vietnam War, but also his way of preserving the fairy tale tone and ensuring the story ended on a note of joy. The Ewoks then would stay, controversial or not. Their fate would rest entirely on how audiences would receive them. But as questions mounted, and a lack of time quickly becoming a factor, one stroke of fortune finally hit the production. Lucas was able to bring back his longtime writing collaborator, Lawrence Kasdan, thanks to a carefully worded clause in his contract that acted as a technical workaround that sidestepped another Empire-style credits dispute. With a writer on board, what followed was 5 consecutive days of story conferences at Lucas's home. 10-hour marathons of nearly non-stop debate between Lucas, Kasdan, Marquand and Kazanjian. Lucas had written fragments of drafts beforehand, but nothing was fixed. Every idea was on the table. The result was a sprawling 268-page transcript filled with circular arguments, discarded decisions, and constant rethinking of structure. Some questions were resolved quickly. Luke would build a new lightsaber, and Obi-Wan's misleading account of Luke's parentage would be explained away in dialogue about a certain point of view. But other issues consumed days of debate. The biggest sticking points were the story's MacGuffin and where the climax was going to take place. Lucas's first idea placed the action on the Imperial capital, Hab Abaddon, and its moon, setting the stage for an enormous multi-front battle. But the concept was quickly deemed unfilmable. It was too complex, too expensive, and too difficult for the effects team to realise. It was simply too ambitious for the era. The fallback solution was a second Death Star, half-finished, which would deliberately bait the rebels into believing it wasn't yet operational. Kasdan and Lucas would go back and forth between these two concepts, with both at any one time arguing that a second Death Star was a hollow repeat of the first film and that Hab Abaddon would give the story the epic scope it deserved. But pragmatism eventually won out. A second Death Star was cheaper, simpler, and more achievable. The grand vision of a climactic battle across 2 worlds was consigned to the dustbin of Star Wars what-ifs. Another source of conflict was the tone of the ending. Kasdan believed that the story needed sacrifice, deaths that would give the finale emotional weight. As he put it, without loss, the film risked feeling hollow. Lucas flatly refused. Star Wars, he insisted, was a fairy tale, and fairy tales ended with the heroes triumphant and the audience uplifted. No one would die if he could help it. The question of Luke's temptation by the dark side was equally contentious. If the Emperor was now positioned to recruit Luke as his new apprentice, that meant Vader's role had to shift. Instead of luring Luke to rule at his side, Vader was now a subordinate, complicit in the Emperor's plan, sidelined in a way he hadn't been in Empire. The group did eventually agree that Vader should ultimately die, and that audiences would finally see the man behind the mask. But Lucas and Kasdan clashed bitterly on what Luke's fate should be. Lucas believed Luke must reject temptation, destroy the Emperor, and embody the triumph of good over evil. Kasdan pushed for a darker twist, even half joking that Luke should don Vader's helmet and become the next Dark Lord. Lucas wouldn't budge. Luke Skywalker, he argued, could never fall. You get all the pieces in the script and it's like a puzzle. You just keep moving them around until they all fit in the right place. And that's what I liked about Larry. It's much easier to work with somebody whose judgment you trust, because then they ask the hard questions. It's very hard to write by yourself, because it's very hard to be self-critical. But Lucas and Kasdan's back and forth wouldn't simply end after the conference. Instead, every time Kasdan delivered his drafts, Lucas would immediately take them back and rewrite them, by his own account, changing nearly 50% of the story each time. Kasdan, meanwhile, found himself constrained. In trying to reshape the story around the new structure, he couldn't merge the Vader of Empire, a relentless, terrifying force hell-bent on converting Luke, with the Vader unfolding in Jedi. Here, Vader seemed to lose his edge. Stripped of the dramatic momentum he carried in Empire, Kasdan felt that Vader had become a plot puppet, moving where the story needed him rather than where his character demanded. For the pre-production crew, these constant changes to the story were maddening. Special effects teams would begin work on elaborate set pieces only to watch them vanish in the blink of an eye. In one instance, Mark I visited the effects department to find a massive lava field under construction. The team had been told that Luke's final confrontation with the Emperor would take place beneath Hab Abaddon in a lava-filled set. Mark I had to tell them that the entire set had been scrapped. As the script continued to mutate, the production moved into casting. All supporting actors would return, with Eric Bosefeld, Sebastian Shaw, and Caroline Blackiston added to the lineup. Over 120 little people applied for the Ewoks, including an 11-year-old boy named Warwick Davis. I don't think anybody on the movie was quite as excited as I was. Being an 11-year-old on a Star Wars film, there was no stopping me. But the most difficult and crucial search was for the Emperor. The trilogy's ultimate villain had to embody menace, authority, and a sense of mythic evil. Dozens of seasoned actors auditioned, among them David Suchet and even a young Ben Kingsley. Yet Marquand wasn't convinced. He wanted someone older, someone whose age and experience could bring an immediate weight to the role. After an exhaustive search, he settled on a veteran stage actor, 75-year-old Alan Webb. And with that, the Emperor was cast. For the main trio, it became a more complicated story. Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher were both contractually agreed to be in the trilogy's finale, but fans at the time speculated endlessly about the fate of their other hero, Han Solo. Unlike his co-stars, Harrison Ford hadn't signed a multi-picture deal, and his willingness to return was in doubt. During that marathon story conference, so much time had been consumed by debates over the climax that neither Han nor Leia ever received satisfying arcs. Both were left as collateral damage. Their romance, so central to The Empire Strikes Back, was reduced in Jedi to little more than a functional task, advancing the plot rather than deepening the characters. Ford's instincts cut directly to the heart of this issue. I desperately wanted to die. I thought it would give the myth some body, and that Han Solo, in fact, really had no place to go. He would have best served the situation by giving it the weight of a sacrifice. But that was the one thing I was unable to convince George of. George has a predisposition for happy endings. For both Ford and Kasdan, a death, particularly Han's, would have given the finale gravitas and consequence. But Lucas refused to budge. To sound like a broken record, Star Wars, he insisted, was a fairy tale, and fairy tales didn't end in mourning. The audience had to leave the theatre uplifted. Han Solo would live, and Ford would sign on for the trilogy's conclusion. Later, Ford would comment, there was no future in dead Han toys. Meanwhile, Carrie Fisher faced her own battle. While proud of Leia's toughness, she worried the character was becoming too sharp and too brittle, with people even coming up to her on the street and calling Leia a space bitch. Addressing Fisher's concerns, Lucas decided to reframe Leia entirely for Jedi. Suddenly, the fierce commander would be softened into a more romantic, traditionally feminine figure. All of a sudden I was someone who loves you and, you know, all that stuff. My hair was down and I'm wearing this hippie dress. I felt like a Barbie doll. I felt really uncomfortable. With the cast locked in and filming only 6 weeks away, Lucas's obsession with secrecy added a whole other layer of madness. Empire had been dogged by leaks, and this time he was determined to protect the film at all costs. To throw off journalists, Revenge of the Jedi was disguised under the deliberately bland working title Blue Harvest, complete with the tongue-in-cheek tagline Horror Beyond Imagination. For the cast and crew, the secrecy was disorienting. For fans, it meant the mystery only deepened. And for Lucas, it was the price of trying to control a cultural phenomenon that had already grown far bigger than himself. The first of what would be a 4-month filming schedule began at Elstree Studios in the UK on January 11th, 1982, before the production returned to the US for location shoots in Yuma, Arizona and California's Redwood National and State Parks. From the beginning, the scale was overwhelming and the budget strained. All 9 sound stages at Elstree were consumed by massive Star Wars sets, each one draining manpower and money. The Ewok village alone ballooned more than $100,000 over budget, simply from the labour needed to make it look authentic. And in the Arizona desert, Jabba's sail barge devoured $2.5 million, for a sequence that would last barely 2.5 minutes on screen. Both Marquand and Lucas realised that without tighter control, Jedi risked going the way of Empire, weeks over schedule and millions over budget. Either Lucas volunteered or Marquand requested it, accounts differ, but ultimately Lucas would be on set full time. I just said, look, George, if I am going to do this properly, you've got to give me your time. I mean, he hadn't necessarily planned to be in London at the shoot, but I said, you've got to be there. I like my producer around, and you're more than the producer. You wrote this goddamn thing, so let's get it right. In trying to get somebody who could handle something that big, basically I was pretty naive about it. There just weren't very many people that had any experience doing it. So I knew by that time, especially after doing Empire, that I was going to have to be there the whole time. I was already resigned to doing that. This created a strange dynamic on set, with Marquand inexperienced at handling such a massive, effects-heavy production. Lucas frequently stepped in on key decisions. George was on set all the time, and it was confusing sometimes because you have a director, but I think he was a little insecure in his role. It can't be easy to direct somebody else's brainchild. Fisher remembered being given one direction by Marquand, only for Lucas to step in moments later with completely different instructions. Hamill recalled that, fairly early in production, he simply resigned himself to the reality that he was working for 2 directors. To avoid conflict, he would perform several different versions of each line or scene, offering multiple readings so that Lucas and Marquand could sort out in post-production which interpretation they wanted. Many on set sympathised with Marquand, stepping into one of the biggest productions in Hollywood history with only a modest resume behind him. But others grew frustrated, sensing that he was overcompensating by leaning harder on his authority. Part of the friction came down to style. Lucas valued coverage above all else. Master shots, mediums, close-ups, always multiple angles to give him options in the edit. Marquand, by contrast, came from television, where directors typically block scenes in advance and shoot them in a more contained, linear way. Together, they managed to make it work. But the uneasy balance between creator and director, between Lucas's need for control and Marquand's fight for authority, would hang over the entire production. Another major headache for the production came with the casting of the Emperor. The role had originally gone to Alan Webb, but England's record cold weather left the veteran actor snowed in, and with a crippling case of flu. After several days, Webb sent Marquand a letter apologising, admitting he was simply too ill to continue. Tragically, the illness took a permanent toll, and Webb would die only a few months later on June 22nd, 1982. For the filmmakers, they suddenly found themselves in a dire position. One of their most crucial villains had to be recast while cameras were already rolling. They returned to their short list of actors and settled on Ian McDiarmid, a theatre-trained performer with the intensity they needed. Within hours of reaching out, Lucas and Marquand met him in person. Not long after, McDiarmid was handed the role of a lifetime. McDiarmid's path to that moment had been a long one. After working for a year to afford tuition, he trained at the Royal Scottish Academy of Dramatic Art. From there, he built his career on the stage, playing across England and Scotland before joining the Royal Shakespeare Company. Films soon followed, with notable appearances in The Awakening and Dragonslayer. For McDiarmid, transforming into the Emperor was an ordeal in itself. The makeup took 4 hours to apply each day. The design aimed for an ancient, corrupted look rather than simple old age. The result was unforgettable. An awful face that gave voice to some of the most villainous dialogue in the saga. By the time McDiarmid finally stepped into the role of Emperor, 6 weeks of filming had already been completed, but production was still scrambling to keep pace. Departments worked flat out, often 7 days a week in 2 12-hour shifts, just to keep sets finished and dressed in time for the cameras. Even then, they often weren't. The Imperial landing platform, for instance, remained half-built when the cast arrived to shoot their scenes. Across the Atlantic, ILM was facing its own crunch. Spielberg's E.T. was about to hit theatres that summer, and ILM had to split its resources between wrapping those effects and ramping up for Jedi. And then there were the Ewoks. Grainy, black and white reels showed teddy bear-like creatures scampering across artificial trees, and many crew members quietly murmured to one another what kind of film they were helping to make. It was very difficult to get the Ewoks to really seem threatening. They're designed to be cute and fuzzy, virtual teddy bears, but they're also the ones who save the day, so they had to have this dual capacity. And yet, despite the constant pressures, the production finished in just 88 shooting days, 50 less than Empire's 144. For the cast, it was a bittersweet goodbye. It was the final time that I was playing this character with these people I'd grown to love so much. Part of me never wanted it to end. But for the filmmakers, the hardest part was still ahead. ILM now had barely a year to complete 500 visual effects shots, each one composed of dozens, sometimes even hundreds of individual elements. For context, Empire required 425 shots over 19 months. Within ILM, morale began to fracture as post-production got underway. What had once been a well-oiled machine during Empire was now strained by secrecy, endless revisions, and the absence of Lucas's guiding presence. Without his day-to-day involvement, confusion spread through the ranks. What few inside the company realised was that Lucas himself was fighting a battle far more personal. Behind the scenes, his marriage to Marsha Lucas, an Academy Award-winning editor who had been instrumental to the success of the first 2 films, was falling apart. I was destroyed because I had no idea. It just came out of the blue. I was trying to finish the movie, but now I was also going through a divorce. I tried to hold myself together emotionally and still do the movie, but it was very, very hard. It was an act of great energy to get up in the morning and go to work. I was so depressed. The man who had built a galaxy far, far away was now struggling to hold his own world together. While the public anticipated the grand finale of the trilogy, Lucas was living through his own private collapse. By late 1982, ILM was running 20-hour days, juggling up to 8 camera crews, and still falling behind. Effect counts ballooned. Entire sequences were changed, added, or deleted in the final months, pushing departments to their breaking point. Lucas personally approved every element of every shot, sometimes reviewing each one 20 or 30 times. As if that weren't enough, Lucas ordered a late change. The title would revert from Revenge of the Jedi to Return of the Jedi. The change would cost an extra $250,000 in reprinted marketing, but he felt it was essential. By April 1983, ILM was exhausted, but the deadline was immovable. And yet, against all odds, the pieces just came together. Return of the Jedi was finished in time for its May 25th release, exactly 6 years to the day after Star Wars first premiered. What followed was Jedi hysteria. Across the United States, crowds lined sidewalks, kids bounced with excitement, and theaters overflowed. At previews, audiences erupted in applause again and again. Lucas's goal, to leave audiences spiritually uplifted, seemed to have been achieved. Critics, however, were split. Some praised the spectacle, others complained of weak performances, Mark I's uncertain direction, and a lack of Vader's menace. But for audiences, none of that seemed to matter. By the end of its run, Return of the Jedi grossed over $250 million domestically, placing it among the all-time box office champions of the era. More important than the numbers was the film's emotional legacy. For the children who grew up with the trilogy, Jedi wasn't just a conclusion, it was a celebration. The saga that began with a farm boy staring at twin suns ended with redemption, reconciliation, and hope. For Lucas, though, the triumph came in the shadow of heartbreak. In the same months he was finally finishing his space fantasy epic, he was also completing his divorce and the end of an era in his personal life. The trilogy that had defined his career had left him financially independent, but emotionally hollow. If I had to do the films all over again, I'd have to think about it, especially if I knew what I was going to have to give up in order to get it. And yet, perhaps that's what makes Return of the Jedi so fitting as a conclusion. It's a film born of exhaustion, compromise and turmoil, but one that still radiates optimism. Audiences left uplifted, just as Lucas had promised. Return of the Jedi is a strange one for me. It's, without question, the weakest film of the original trilogy, and yet it's the one I have watched the most often. And that says something about how powerfully it sticks the landing. On a narrative level, Return of the Jedi is a fascinating finale because it sits at the crossroads of tradition and subversion. It restores the fairy tale ending, but only after confronting the abyss. While it returns to moral simplicity, it still tells a compelling story about a hero tested against the ultimate evil, forced to decide whether to strike out in anger or stand firm in compassion. In many ways, Return of the Jedi embodies the return that Joseph Campbell described in The Hero with a Thousand Faces. The final stage of the journey where the protagonist emerges transformed and brings back the elixir of wisdom. The climax is less about victory in battle than about whether the hero can resist destruction and what that resistance awakens in others. Structurally, it begins with a 40-minute prologue of Jabba's palace that almost feels like its own short film, before launching into this three-pronged finale: the battle in space, the fight on the forest moon, and the confrontation in the Emperor's throne room. And tonally, the film tries to balance the operatic darkness of Luke's battle with the Emperor with the whimsical cuddliness of the Ewoks. A choice that, while now probably feels a bit quaint, was one of the most divisive in the franchise's history at the time. So in this section, we're going to go through Return of the Jedi scene by scene, unpacking how it functions as both a conclusion to the trilogy and a conclusion to Luke's hero's journey. Along the way, we'll weave in behind-the-scenes stories that shape the film, explore what Jedi achieves in terms of spectacle and theme, and also where it stumbles, whether in character, structure, or tone. Because while Jedi may not reach the heights of Empire, it still delivers one of the most unique resolutions in blockbuster cinema. A finale that reclaims the fairy tale, but only after putting the hero through their hardest challenge yet. Let's get cracking. Return of the Jedi follows the series' staple tradition by opening with the crawl, and already, the film's first misstep is on display. The text itself reads clunky, awkwardly structured in a way that undercuts the sense of mythic grandeur the crawl is meant to evoke. All you have to do is compare it to the opening sentences of the previous films to see its shortcomings. It is a period of civil war. It is a dark time for the rebellion. In just a single, short line, each sets the stage, captures the tone, and pulls the audience into the story. By contrast, Jedi begins... Okay, wait, hang on. Luke Skywalker has returned to his home planet of Tatooine and attempted to rescue his friend Han Solo from the clutches of the vile gangster Jabba the Hutt. Not only is the opening paragraph just one long sentence, but it lacks the elegance and immediacy of the earlier films. Instead of establishing a mythic mood, it reads more like a plot summary, less a fairy tale prologue, and more functional setup. Now, admittedly, it's a small detail, but it's either join the rat race or analyze Star Wars. And brother, I'm ready for some jizz. Anyway, the detail is important because it perfectly captures the contradictions that define Jedi. A film that delivers spectacle and conclusion, but often stumbles in how it frames its story. And those contradictions begin right here, before a single image hits the screen. To summarise the crawl, Luke and his friends are heading to Tatooine on what amounts to a side quest, rescuing Han Solo from Jabba the Hutt. Meanwhile, the Empire are busy re-establishing their hold on the galaxy by constructing a second Death Star, a weapon that, if completed, will crush the rebellion once and for all. On paper, it's a compelling setup, but we need to address the elephant in the room. For all of its hype and ominous build-up, a second Death Star simply just isn't very engaging on a narrative level. As mentioned earlier, the choice to recycle the superweapon came down to cost effectiveness and simplicity. Building a massive city planet like Abaddon was far more expensive, while another Death Star was a recognisable threat the audience could immediately understand. It was pragmatic filmmaking, but dramatically, it feels like a retread. I had blown up the Death Star in the first one, but I'd stolen it from the third and put it in the first to give me an ending. I was sort of borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, but I didn't know whether Paul was ever going to get made anyway, so what the hell. That honesty is refreshing, but it also underlines the problem. The second Death Star wasn't born out of storytelling ambition, it was an unfortunate byproduct of circumstance. Lucas had already spent his trump card in the original film, pulling the Death Star forward to give Star Wars a dramatic finale, and now he was forced to recycle it. On screen, what should have felt like the culmination of a fairy tale saga instead plays like a repeat of a great trick we've already seen. It's still engaging, but it could never recapture the same magic as the first time. With the second Death Star, the film also lost the striking contrast Lucas had originally envisioned. A hellish industrial city world set against the natural, almost Edenic serenity of the forest moon. That kind of visual and thematic juxtaposition, corruption versus innocence, decay versus renewal, could have deepened the film's mythic underpinnings. Instead, the more streamlined Death Star setting came at the cost of that symbolic richness. And that compromise would come to define many of the contradictions at the heart of Return of the Jedi. Arriving at the unfinished Death Star, Darth Vader steps out of his shuttle to deliver ominous news to the station's commander. Unimpressed with the slow pace of construction, Vader announces that the Emperor himself will soon arrive to oversee the project. It's a short, efficient scene, barely 2 minutes, but it quietly accomplishes a lot. Visually, it reinforces the illusion that the Death Star is incomplete, a crucial setup for the trap later on. And tonally, it's classic Star Wars. It re-establishes Vader's dominance, framed in low angles and backlit smoke as John Williams' Imperial March pounds like a war drum. And narratively, it plants the seed for the film's true looming presence, the Emperor. After 2 films of hearing his name in whispers, the shadow will finally take form. One of the main concerns Lucas and Kasdan felt while writing the conclusion was that Vader would lose his villainous edge now that the Emperor is here. And already, that issue is starting to take form. For all his ominous entrance and booming voice, Vader basically spends this scene as a middle management enforcer. He shows up, checks on progress, tells the foreman their boss is coming, and demands better results before walking off. There's a strangely bureaucratic energy to it all, as if he's been demoted from Dark Sorcerer to Project Supervisor. His purpose in this film will be explored more deeply later on, but already in this opening scene, the Dark Lord from the previous films is seemingly lost. Also, knowing the tough conditions people went through to get this film finished on time, racing deadlines and struggling under Lucas's perfectionism, some of these lines probably hit a little too close to home for ILM.
And he is most displeased with your apparent lack of progress.
We shall double our efforts.
Far away from the construction of the second Death Star, Jedi continues to return the trilogy back to its simpler roots, as 2 droids cross the empty desert of Tatooine. The cyclical nature of this setup immediately roots Jedi in its mythic origins. A story that began in the desert now returns there to close the loop. Message in tow, R2 and 3PO arrive outside Jabba's palace, intending to show the message to the crime boss himself. Entering the palace, the film was already sticking to Lucas's mission to make this film the monster movie. Jedi throws the 2 droids into an absolute freak show. They're confronted by a spindly spider droid, Jabba's pigmen guards, and his second-in-command, Bib Fortuna, who, with his bright orange eyes, his long, phallus-looking head tail, and his invasive nature, all show visually how out of their depth the 2 droids suddenly are. And they're about to be confronted by a lot worse. That reveal perfectly aligns with Lucas's monster movie ethos. It's not subtle, but it is effective. By immediately showing Jabba in all his gluttonous glory, Lucas removes any trace of mystery and instead leads into grotesque fascination, a visual metaphor for the moral corruption that the heroes will have to confront when they finally step through those doors. But the Jabba we know and love today, love might be too generous a word, granted, barely made it to set on time. Designed by Stuart Freeborn, the legendary makeup artist behind Yoda and Chewbacca, bringing the repulsive crime lord to life was one of the most ambitious undertakings in Return of the Jedi's entire production. Using 4 tons of clay, Freeborn and his team sculpted Jabba's enormous body over a massive wooden frame. From there, his foam latex skin had to be baked in special ovens using toxic chemicals so hazardous that the crew worked in masks, helmets, and full white protective suits. When Jabba finally rolled, or rather slid, onto set, he was everything Lucas had envisioned. Disgusting, bloated, and repulsive. Covered in slime and drool, the puppet was a masterpiece of grotesque engineering. At more than 18 feet long, Jabba was a triumph of design, and a logistical nightmare. He couldn't move, he couldn't be repositioned, and he required the scene to be choreographed entirely around him. To bring Jabba to life, a small army of puppeteers was needed. Coordinating all these movements required near military precision. Every blink, breath, and twitch had to sync perfectly with dialogue and camera movement. It was then down to sound designer Ben Burtt to give Jabba his voice and texture. Actor Larry Ward provided the guttural vocal performance, which Burtt pitch shifted down to an inhuman depth, the lowest possible register before speech became unintelligible. Using a subharmonic generator, Burtt layered in low-frequency rumbles, giving Jabba's words a seismic growl. To that, he added a perverse layer of slurping and gurgling, sourced from the sound of his wife stirring macaroni and cheese in a bowl.
We're doomed.
The end result was a living piece of nightmare fuel. Jabba wasn't disgusting just for shock value. He was a physical manifestation of gluttony, greed, and decay, the opposite of the ascetic Jedi ideal that Luke would later embody. And today, in an era of CGI overload, Jabba remains a testament to the artistry of practical effects, a revolting, magnificent achievement that still oozes personality 40 years later. Standing before the mighty Jabba the Hutt, R2 projects Luke's holographic message. Calm, confident, and composed, Luke offers a simple trade: the two droids in exchange for Han Solo, still frozen in carbonite. Jabba, of course, refuses. In his booming, guttural voice, he declares that he'll keep both Han and the droids as new additions to his collection. It's a great little moment of world building and a nice setup for what's to come. Dragged away from the throne room, R2 and 3PO are led through a grim procession of cells and droid torture chambers, an image that's both equal parts absurd and disturbing. The scene treats the palace like a hellish funhouse of depravity. Eventually, the droids are put to work. 3PO is assigned as Jabba's translator, while R2 becomes a waiter on the Hutt sail barge. It's darkly funny, but also thematically revealing. To Luke and the rebels, these droids are friends and companions, or at the very least nuisances in Han's case. But to Jabba, they're disposable objects of amusement, tools to exploit, like everything else in his life. That contrast perfectly reflects Lucas's original concept of Jabba as an evil sultan-like figure, a grotesque symbol of greed, consumption, and absolute corruption. Meanwhile, the palace's distorted energy keeps building. Back in the throne room, Jabba and his guests indulge in an alien cabaret of noise and chaos. And the center stage is the palace's in-house performer, Sice Noodles, whose rubbery Mick Jagger lips and gyrating dance are the stuff of fever dreams.
So, see if we can find the debutante and see what he's up to and have a chat to him. Moises! Hello there.
How are you, mate?
Good, and yourself?
Good, thanks, mate.
Might just join you by the bed there, mate.
What's going on there?
I thought we'd just have a little bit of a chat.
Beautiful.
Yeah, what are you doing there?
I was just listening to some Spotify, mate.
Yeah.
Yeah, just listening to some tunes.
Well,
The song, Lapti Neck, was originally just a temp track recorded by sound department assistant Annie Abergast, who was an aspiring reggae singer. She improvised her own lyrics in Huttese, and Ben Burtt recorded her performance as a placeholder. But when it came time to replace it, Lucas and John Williams decided to instead keep it. The raw, slightly off-kilter vibe fit the bizarre tone of the palace, and after living with it for a year, Lucas reportedly couldn't find anything else. The result is one of the strangest, most hypnotic sequences in the trilogy, a kind of sleazy, alien MTV moment that perfectly encapsulates the film's weird blend of puppetry, spectacle, and tone-deaf brilliance. The throne room itself was one of the most challenging and chaotic sets ever built for the Star Wars saga. Not only was it physically small, but it was absolutely packed. A hive of creatures, puppeteers, smoke, lights, and noise. Every inch of the frame is filled with detail. Grotesque aliens squirming in the shadows, guards jostling for space, a giant cooking spit roasting behind Jabba's dais, chains, weapons, alien fruit bowls, musical instruments, and that now iconic metal grate on the floor hiding a certain pit below. To make it all work, production designer Norman Reynolds had to elevate the entire set several feet off the ground to allow space for the puppeteers operating the various monsters from below. This intricate design dramatically increased the set's cost and complexity, but it was the only way to make Jabba's palace feel alive, a fully functioning den of depravity rather than a static backdrop. The real challenge though wasn't just building the set, it was surviving it. The throne room quickly became infamous among the crew as one of the most uncomfortable environments ever filmed. At the height of production, more than 200 people were crammed into the tight space, though only about a quarter of them were actually visible on camera. The rest were hidden under the floor or behind the set walls. Makeup artists, puppeteers, engineers, camera operators, and creature wranglers all shouting instructions and fighting for room to breathe. Temperatures routinely climbed past 38 degrees Celsius under the hot light and the crush of bodies. The actors inside the monster suits, under layers of foam, rubber and latex, suffered the worst of it. And for the performers inside Jabba himself, things were even more nightmarish. The puppet was a fire hazard waiting to happen. Built from nylon, rubber, and surrounded by wooden set pieces, it would have gone up in seconds if a single spark had hit it. And yet, all of that suffering translated beautifully on the screen. The throne room looks, sounds, and feels oppressive, hot, crowded, and suffocating. You can practically smell the smoke and the sweat. That sense of claustrophobia isn't just physical, it's thematic. This is the lowest, dirtiest corner of the galaxy, a den of gluttony and excess. And every uncomfortable detail reminds us just how far Luke and his friends have to climb just to escape it. It's a triumph of production design born from pure endurance, both for the characters and for the crew trapped inside the belly of the beast. As Jabba is delighting in his own cruelty, casually dropping one of his dancers into the pit below, the debauchery is interrupted by the arrival of a mysterious intruder. The intruder, dressed in a desert scavenger armor, steps forward and presents a prize, the captured Chewbacca. The room goes silent. What follows is a tense exchange of threats and haggling that ends with a bounty hunter known as Bosch winning Jabba's respect and a healthy payment. Chewie is dragged away to the dungeons, but not before passing some familiar faces. Later that night, the palace quiets, the lights dim, and the bounty hunter returns, not for money, but for rescue. Approaching Jabba's throne, Bosch, it's Leia. Sorry to spoil it for you, unlocks the carbonite slab and releases the prize within. It's one of the trilogy's most iconic moments, the hero thawed from his icy tomb. But behind the scenes, it nearly didn't happen. The script described the emotional weight of the scene, but offered no guidance on how to physically show Han emerging from the carbonite. Lucas wanted something tactile. He wanted to see the carbonite melt away on camera, revealing Han's face underneath. The problem was, there was no way to do that in real time with the footage they had and the deadline looming. After several failed tests, ILM's team, led by Phil Tippett, devised an ingenious solution. They sculpted a wax replica of Ford's carbonite face, backlit it with an intense light source, and used stop-motion animation to simulate cracks of light bursting through the surface. Even if the team never fully felt satisfied with the final result, the sequence works beautifully on screen. The light bleeding through the carbonite feels almost biblical, a resurrection moment for Han Solo both literally and metaphorically. What was, in production terms, a logistical nightmare became, in cinematic terms, a visual rebirth, the first breath of life returning to one of the saga's most beloved heroes. Han, groggy and disoriented, is stiff from hibernation, his eyes temporarily blinded. Confused, Han is unable to recognize his savior.
Who are you?
Someone who loves you.
This moment does more than deliver fan service. It's a clever emotional mirror to what came before. Leia's entrance as the bounty hunter may make little logical sense when you stop to think about it, and trust me, we're going to get to that, but narratively, it does speak volumes about her growth. Back in Star Wars, for instance, Han was the only one Chewie trusted enough to cuff him. Here, it's Leia, showing not just how far she's come as a leader, but as a friend. Her bravery and compassion now extend beyond command. She's acting out of love, not duty. And that's the most important shift. In Star Wars, Han's rescue of Leia was self-serving. He was in it for the money. Leia's rescue of Han is selfless. She risks everything, driven by affection rather than obligation. In a trilogy about the struggle between self-interest and self-sacrifice, this reversal perfectly captures how much these characters have grown. But that love story won't get its happy ending just yet. With a deep, mocking laugh, Jabba and his entourage pull back the curtain, revealing that they've been watching the whole time. Han's old scoundrel instincts kick in. He tries to bargain, to bluff, to buy their way out. Jabba, unmoved, sends him to the cells. Leia, meanwhile, faces a far crueler fate, one that will literalize the theme of power and exploitation that defines Jabba's palace. Down below, Han reunites with Chewie, and it's a genuinely lovely beat. Even blind, Han recognizes his friend's voice immediately, a small moment that says everything about their bond. As Chewie fills him in on the situation and mentions that Luke is now a Jedi Knight, Han laughs it off. The idea sounds absurd to him, just as the Force once did. Han may have softened over time, but his skepticism remains intact. He still needs to see before he can believe. And soon, he will. Cloaked in black, Luke Skywalker steps out of the shadows like a figure from myth. Calm, composed, and unnervingly powerful. In mere seconds, he force chokes 2 guards and uses a Jedi mind trick on Bib Fortuna. The contrast to his farm boy origins couldn't be starker. His white tunic, symbolic of innocence, has changed to black robes, representing power, authority, and traditionally the dark side. The brilliance of this moment isn't just in showing Luke's confidence, it's in the ambiguity it introduces. The same powers that mark his mastery also hint at danger. His black robes, his quiet authority, his willingness to choke out his enemies all suggest that Luke is walking a razor's edge between the light and the dark. This is the foundation of his hero's journey in Return of the Jedi. Luke has already faced the abyss in The Empire Strikes Back. He's confronted his own fear and failure. Now, he's entered the final phase, the return of the elixir. But the question isn't whether he's powerful enough, it's what he'll do with that power. The Jabba sequence becomes his trial of control. Surrounded by greed, lust, and corruption, Luke must learn to master not just the Force, but himself. His every choice here, harm or mercy, domination or compassion, will foreshadow the decision that defines the saga's end. Standing before Jabba, Luke attempts to convince the crime lord to let his friends go. And look, alright, we have to talk about it. It wouldn't be fair if I just ignored one of the most talked about things in the entire film, and that had a strong effect on young children everywhere. So, alright, let's talk about Salacious Crumb.
So you see, that's where the trouble began. That smile. That damn smile.
Luke negotiates with Jabba, and it's a great showcase of... Okay, I'm just joking. Let's talk about Leia's slave outfit. The infamous metal bikini is both one of the most recognizable and most criticized costumes in cinema history. Made from a very rigid metal, it was so uncomfortable that Carrie Fisher could barely move without risking a wardrobe malfunction. As she later put it, it didn't go where you went. After shots, the prop man would have to check me. He'd say, okay, tits are fine, let's go. Then it was cut, how they doing, hooters in place. I was embarrassed at first, 100 guys going crazy over my revealed self. Dignity was out of the question. Fisher's frustration wasn't just about the discomfort, it was about what the scene represented. Leia, who had spent 2 films being fierce, defiant, and outspoken, was suddenly silenced. The thing that killed me about this setup was, okay, you put me in this bathing suit, but then I have to stop talking from here on? Strip me and I'm silent. I was defiant of everyone else, but this slug really shuts me up. And Fisher was right to be frustrated. Narratively, Leia's enslavement was meant to illustrate Jabba's grotesque cruelty, his complete domination of others, both physically and symbolically. But on a meta level, it also undercut one of cinema's great feminist icons, momentarily trapping her in the same trope she'd spent 2 films transcending. Yet, to play devil's advocate, the scene isn't entirely without thematic merit. Leia's subjugation visualizes the stakes of tyranny, what happens when individuality and agency are consumed by corruption and power. Her silence under Jabba's control is powerful not because it's titillating, but because it's degrading. A glimpse of what the galaxy becomes if evil wins. And crucially, to go forward a bit, Leia reclaims her agency in the most direct way possible, by strangling her oppressor with the very chain that bound her. Of course, that doesn't excuse how the scene has been remembered. Today, Slave Leia is as instantly recognisable as the hair buns that introduced her. For many who've never seen the films, this image is Leia, a pop culture paradox where a symbol of empowerment doubles as one of exploitation. Critics argue that the outfit's popularity flattened Leia's legacy, turning her into a sex symbol rather than the sharp, uncompromising leader she is. And while that argument has weight, it also sells the audiences a little short. Leia endures because she contains contradictions. The same woman who can wear a gold bikini is the one who kills the gangster who put her in it. She's the action hero, the diplomat, the rebel, and yes, the woman who fought off a giant slug while wearing less fabric than a napkin. In context, Leia's captivity echoes the pulp serials and adventure films that Star Wars drew from, where women were often reduced to damsels in distress. But Lucas and Fisher both push against that trope. Leia might start this scene as an object, but she ends it as an executioner, turning Jabba's fantasy of control into his own downfall. The lesson isn't subtle. The role may imply helplessness, but the character never embodies it. Meanwhile, Luke continues his negotiation with Jabba, and it becomes pretty clear how far he's come since Empire. While giving Jabba an opportunity to back down, he does so with calmness, but also arrogance, the confidence of a man who believes he's already won. When Jabba laughs off his offer, Luke's composure cracks. In a flash of anger, he reaches for violence, using the Force to pull a blaster. It's a small moment, but a revealing one. This isn't the Luke who once strained to summon his lightsaber in the icy caverns of Hoth. This is someone fully in control of their power. But with that control comes something dangerous. The belief that power itself will solve everything. And in Joseph Campbell's terms, this encounter represents Luke's atonement with the Shadow. Having faced his father, he must now confront the darkness within himself, the same hunger for control that corrupted Anakin Skywalker. Jabba, for all of his grotesque absurdity, becomes a mirror of that temptation, a being who bends others to his will through greed, cruelty, and fear. So, when Luke's diplomacy fails and he's dropped into the pit below, it's a symbolic descent into his own underworld, the literal and metaphorical belly of the beast. As the trapdoor slams shut and the crowd erupts in laughter, Luke finds himself alone in a damp, claustrophobic chamber. The gate creaks open and out lumbers Jabba's pet, the Rancor, a hulking, slobbering creature that looks like a pit bull that had a rough childhood and a gym membership. Behind the scenes, Lucas didn't care what the creature was, only that it was a big monster in a pit. After multiple failed tests, ILM pivoted to a Japanese bunraku-style rod puppet, filmed in slow motion to give it a sense of weight and menace. For the voice of the Rancor, Burt sourced the bass sound from a tiny but insanely aggressive dachshund that belonged to his neighbour. The result is one of the saga's most memorable monsters, a great test for Luke that mirrors his internal struggle. Stripped of his weapon, his composure, and his allies, he's forced to rely instead on his instinct and intellect. It's a classic ordeal, the stage in the hero's journey where the hero must face death to prove transformation. In Star Wars, the naive farm boy would have turned and run. In Empire, the overconfident apprentice would have tried to fight and failed. But here, Luke adapts. He's calm under pressure, calculating, and creative, using his environment to survive rather than brute force. When Luke defeats the Rancor, it's more than a monster-slaying victory, it's proof of his evolution. The crowd roars, Jabba fumes, and Luke has triumphed through self-reliance rather than raw aggression. Yet even in this victory, the film still manages to find humanity in the aftermath. As the dust settles, the Rancor Keeper, a burly guard, bursts into tears, mourning his fallen companion. It's this small, beautifully strange, and deeply human beat. In a film filled with latex monsters and rubber masks, that tiny moment reminds us that these grotesque figures still have hearts. They're not just background decoration, they're part of a living, breathing world. It's a small thing, but it's something that a lot of other blockbuster films miss.
Together again, huh?
Wouldn't miss it.
How are we doing?
Same as always.
That bad, huh?
Reunited at last, this small breather between the characters is short-lived. Jabba, insulted, delivers his judgment. Luke, Han and Chewie are to be executed at the Great Pit of Carkoon, the home of the Sarlacc, a monstrous creature said to digest its victims over 1,000 years. Even in the face of this cruel punishment, Luke stays calm, baiting Jabba with a smirk.
The last mistake you'll ever make.
It's a perfect beat of pulpy bravado, and it once more signals that the young, wide-eyed hero we once knew has grown into someone willing to face death with total faith in his destiny. But before that destiny can play out, we have to address how awful this plan is. Luke's rescue operation is one of the most bafflingly convoluted plans in blockbuster cinema. It's a fascinating contradiction that we don't see very often, narratively satisfying, but logically incoherent. In universe, it's a wildly irresponsible gamble that only succeeds because the Force and screenplay structure demand it. But on a storytelling level, it's a very satisfying stroke of pacing and reveal, a serialized pulp adventure that keeps building tension through a sequence of surprises. Lucas and Kasdan wrestled with this balance throughout development. Early drafts laid out Luke's plan more explicitly. He was intentionally luring Jabba into the open, confident that a confrontation would force his hand and allow for a clean fight. But in the final film, that logic is stripped away in favour of mystery and momentum. We never hear the plan, we only watch it unfold piece by piece, with each reveal designed to jolt the audience. Chewie's capture, Leia's disguise, R2's secret cargo. Each moment lands like a serialized cliffhanger, recalling the old adventure serials that inspired Star Wars in the first place. Still, when viewed through an in-universe lens, the plan's flaws are just too hard to ignore. Sending your friends one by one into a crime lord's lair, only to show up last with a vague promise of trust me, makes Luke look less like a Jedi Knight, and more like the kind of guy whose daily horoscope read, "Don't confront your problems head on," and took it way too literally. A Jedi who willingly endangers others before himself seems, at best, reckless and at worst, manipulative. If you're generous, you could read this as intentional, that Luke's overconfidence is part of his test, that his hubris is blinding him to risk. But since the film never acknowledges or critiques this plan, that reading feels accidental rather than deliberate. It's a rare case of Lucas's mythic structure and narrative logic pulling in opposite directions. Yet, on a purely cinematic level, it works. Sequentially revealing each hero allows the audience to reconnect with them before the trilogy's climax. The absurdity of the plan is redeemed by how well it plays. The suspense, the visual inventiveness, and the triumphant payoff when the plan finally clicks into motion. Structurally, it's a solid way to kick off the film's final chapter, an extended, self-contained mini-adventure that re-establishes tone, camaraderie, and stakes. And with those stakes raised sky high, the sequence builds to its climax as Luke, Han, and Chewie are marched to the Sarlacc pit while Jabba and his entourage watch from his sail barge like nobles at a gladiatorial execution. Han remains skeptical, cracking jokes at Luke's expense, while Luke, by contrast, radiates calm and confidence. Suspended over the Sarlacc's gaping maw, Luke gives Jabba one final warning: free them or die. The crime lord bursts into laughter and signals the execution. For Luke though, this is important. Giving his enemy one last chance to stand down illustrates Luke being honourable to his enemies, even if they don't deserve it. What follows is one of the purest expressions of Star Wars' swashbuckling energy in the entire saga. At the signal, R2 launches Luke's hidden lightsaber through the air, a perfectly timed operatic beat, and Luke ignites it, revealing the unexpected green blade. It's a crowd-pleasing moment, and with John Williams' score soaring, for the first time since Empire, we're reminded of what this universe does best: pure, unfiltered adventure. For Luke, this new lightsaber is important to his character, as the weapon is symbolic of both the Jedi as a whole and to the individual Jedi. As Obi-Wan says, this is the weapon of a Jedi Knight, and with Luke creating his own that is unique to him rather than relying on his father's, Luke has stepped into his own, becoming the hero he once dreamed about on this very same planet. However, Luke's fighting style is, to put it nicely, fascinatingly unrefined. He swings the saber like a baseball bat, a far cry from the elegance Obi-Wan once preached. Yet, that raw, almost reckless movement feels right for who Luke is here. Half-trained, driven by instinct, and caught between serenity and fury. You can't teach that. It's messy, it's thrilling, and it perfectly captures the pulpy DNA of Star Wars. Lucas always said that these films were the modern equivalent of the old Saturday matinee serials, and that influence reaches its zenith here. It's all sand, blasters and cliffhangers. Cinema stripped back to motion, music and myth. Technically, this is also one of the most intricate sequences in the trilogy. Lucas and editor Sean Barton cut the scene at a blistering pace, roughly an edit every 11 frames, making it one of the fastest cut sequences of the early 1980s. That editorial rhythm gives the battle its kinetic charge. The action darts between the skiffs, the barge, and the pit below, creating the illusion of total chaos while maintaining spatial clarity. But as exhilarating as it is, that momentum comes at a cost, most notably to a certain Mandalorian bounty hunter. Is he Mandalorian anymore? I can't keep up with that. Boba Fett, who had emerged from Empire as one of the saga's coolest enemies, is here reduced to a punchline. His tactical decisions are baffling. Jetpacking directly into lightsaber range, getting knocked unconscious, then dying via slapstick accident when Han accidentally triggers his jetpack. For such a fan-favourite character, it's an odd, anticlimactic end. It feels like it's straight from Looney Tunes. Lucas later admitted that the scene's density made it nearly impossible to give every beat its proper weight. There are so many characters and so many pieces of action happening at the same time. We cut it as well as we could, but I always had this nagging feeling we could have done better. And he's right. It reveals one of Jedi's recurring issues, its tendency to favour spectacle over character. Still, within all that chaos, one moment lands perfectly. Inside the barge, Leia seizes her chance. Using the very chains meant to degrade her, she strangles Jabba with them, a cathartic reversal that remains one of her defining acts of agency. Carrie Fisher insisted on performing the stunt herself, and it shows. It's raw, fierce, and liberating. Leia's silence and humiliation throughout the sequence are suddenly inverted into triumph. She doesn't just kill Jabba, she destroys the symbol of her objectification. From there, the scene escalates into a crescendo of pure pulp cinema. Luke leaps aboard the main deck, deflecting blaster fire, Han rescues Lando, Leia mans the deck gun, and the entire sail barge explodes in a glorious fireball. The heroes swing to safety as John Williams' triumphant theme swells, a literal and figurative return to high adventure. Behind the scenes, the same sense of peril was all too real. The Jabba's barge set, constructed in Buttercup Valley, Arizona, was both a technical marvel and a logistical nightmare. With 40-mile-per-hour winds, invasive wildlife, and temperatures soaring past 38 degrees Celsius, the production wasn't smooth sailing. Yeah. At times, the crew managed only mere seconds of usable footage per day. Mark Hamill recalled stuntmen daring each other to make higher and higher leaps into the Sarlacc pit until, inevitably, someone broke a leg. For everyone, the scene was a brutal, blistering ordeal. And yet, as with so much of Return of the Jedi, that struggle translated into cinematic magic. Parting ways after their desert victory, the heroes prepare for their final test. Han, Leia, Chewie and the droids head for the Rebel fleet to join the coming assault on the Empire's new superweapon, while Luke announces that he'll meet them later, after he's made a quick detour to the Dagobah system. Before splitting up though, there's a wonderful small beat that perfectly captures Han's evolution across the trilogy. He tells Luke that now he owes him one, flipping their dynamic from the first film. It's a small, simple line, but it says a lot. Han Solo, once the cynical mercenary who only looked out for himself, has become a man who values loyalty, friendship, and duty. Luke saved him, but Han's real transformation comes from realizing he no longer operates alone. On the cold, steel deck of the second Death Star, Darth Vader prepares for the arrival of his master. The troops line up in perfect formation. The Imperial March thunders. Then, through the mist and shadows, he appears. The Emperor. The camera frames him as a walking void, a black silhouette wrapped in a cloak that seems to swallow the light around it. The cinematography and editing are brilliant here. Hiding his face under a hood, it withholds just enough detail to let the imagination run wild. The Emperor's power isn't shown through action, but through stillness. Everyone, even Darth Vader, bows in his presence. Played by Ian McDiarmid, it's probably unfair to say, but I'll say it, the Emperor saves this film. His performance is operatic yet precise, grotesque yet magnetic. McDiarmid reportedly imagined the Emperor as a mix between an English gentleman and a toad, his voice slithering between upper-class refinement and reptilian croak. The result is one of cinema's most unforgettable villains, pure, distilled malevolence.
Everything is proceeding as I have foreseen.
You just can't take your eyes off him. But while the Emperor ascends, Darth Vader descends, not in power, but in stature. And narratively, that shift is entirely deliberate. Return of the Jedi reframes Vader not as a tyrant in full control, but as the galaxy's most powerful prisoner. A man whose authority has been hollowed out until only obedience remains. The film uses this inversion to expose the tragedy behind the mask. His lines no longer sound like declarations from a conqueror. They sound like excuses from a man with no choices left. Where Star Wars and Empire painted him as invincible, Jedi reveals the truth. He's a servant clinging to scraps of agency, trapped in a hierarchy he once believed he controlled. That erosion of power is essential, because the story isn't about Vader the monster, but Anakin the broken man. It may not be realistic, but Lucas was never aiming for realism. He was writing myth, operatic, symbolic, romantic fairy tales. And those stories don't operate on legal realism or proportional punishment. It operates on emotional truth. In Jedi, redemption isn't earned through good deeds, but through a single irrevocable choice. The film lays the groundwork for that through Vader's inaction. He stops feeling like this impossible force and starts feeling like what he truly is, a slave consumed by his master's will. The mask becomes less a symbol of power and more a prison cell. That dynamic comes through beautifully in their first exchange of the film. When the Emperor senses Vader's restlessness, his unspoken obsession with finding Luke, the scene turns cold, or colder. The Emperor calls him out, almost mocking his emotional attachment. Vader can only bow, wordless, trapped between obedience and longing. It's the first real crack in the armor, and Lucas and Kasdan use it to redefine him not as a monster, but as a man enslaved by one. Vader knows what the Emperor is doing to the kid. Instead of Vader turning Luke to the dark side, maybe the Emperor can. Vader doesn't quite understand that the Emperor's real plan is to replace him by turning Luke. Vader doesn't realize he's on the chopping block. The man who once saw everything through the clarity of rage can no longer see that he's become expendable. The Emperor has no loyalty, only appetite. To him, Vader is just a burnt-out weapon waiting to be replaced. This realization for the audience is what ultimately makes Luke's mission to redeem his father so compelling. If Vader remained a static, irredeemable figure, Luke's compassion would seem naive. But by subtly reconfiguring Vader as a victim of manipulation, a once great warrior consumed by servitude, Lucas and Kasdan give the story emotional weight. Vader's diminished presence isn't a mistake, it's part of his unraveling. Back on the swampy planet of Dagobah, Luke reunites with his old master. While Luke has entered into his prime, Yoda is in his twilight, and his time is coming to an end. However, he still has his charismatic whimsy.
When 900 years old you reach, look as good you will not,
Once more, the Yoda puppet is a triumph on screen. The performance so realistic that you just accept that he is a real, living, breathing creature. I mean, just look at how he hops up onto his bed. It's an incredible achievement by Stuart Freeborn and Frank Oz. But it almost didn't happen. Like so many elements of this production, the Yoda puppet wasn't ready on time, only being completed on the day of filming, which, unsurprisingly, caused a bit of a headache for the filmmakers. but that down-to-the-wire effort paid off, and as Luke sits alongside him in his final moments, the pair discuss the importance of acceptance, Luke's fate, and his mission of the film. While Luke makes the comment that Yoda can't die, Yoda is at peace with the idea, knowing that it is the way of the Force and the destiny of all living things. It is a key difference between the light and dark side of the Force, the film only just showing us in the last scene how twisted and corrupted you become by clinging onto life and power. The Jedi must live unafraid of death, and can only then be immortalized in the Force. But Luke has come seeking closure, intending to finish his Jedi training once and for all, but Yoda, frail and fading, tells him he no longer needs any formal training. The lesson Luke truly needs can't be learned from instruction, only from confrontation. He must face Vader again, not in anger, but in understanding. Only then, by confronting his fear, temptation, and rage, can he earn the right to call himself a Jedi Knight. The trial ahead isn't about power, it's about mastery of the self. That idea is reinforced visually through one of Jedi's most simple pieces of cinematography. Just as in Empire, when Luke is confronted with these ideas, the lighting divides Luke's face down the middle, one half in shadow, the other illuminated. Luke may be calm, wise and disciplined on the surface, but he's still walking a knife's edge between the light and the dark. And yet, before Luke can face his final trial, he needs the truth. He needs to know if Vader truly is his father. Yoda's hesitation here is both funny and tragic. He's practically trying to die fast enough to avoid the question. But death isn't that merciful, and so, with a sigh, Yoda confirms the truth.
Your father is.
The revelation isn't just for Luke, it's also for the audience. In the 3-year gap between Empire and Jedi, fans argued endlessly over whether Vader's claim was a lie, a trick, or a metaphor. This moment lays that debate to rest. The monster really is the father. The confirmation devastates Luke. His enemy and his blood are now the same person. Luke's hero's journey, which began with the search for a father figure, has come full circle. The father he sought to avenge is now the father he must redeem. In Yoda's final moments, he warns Luke of the danger ahead, that the Emperor's seduction will be more psychological than physical. He tells him that a Jedi's greatest strength is compassion, the ability to face hatred without mirroring it. Luke must remember that mercy, even when confronted with unimaginable evil. Then, before vanishing into the Force, Yoda drops one final revelation, the kind that reframes the entire saga. For both Luke and the audience, it's a stunning reveal. His mission now carries the weight of legacy, bloodline, and balance. Thematically, Yoda's passing fulfills one of the most resonant archetypes in Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, the death of the mentor. While not an obligatory step, it's one of the most emotionally vital. The mentor's death is less about loss and more about transition, forcing the hero to internalize everything they've learned and to stand on their own. In mythic terms, the mentor's passing marks the hero's rebirth into self-reliance. It's the story's way of saying, you have everything you need, now prove it. The audience feels the same absence Luke does. His death leaves a void, a symbolic reminder that eventually, every generation must move forward without the ones who came before. Now, as Yoda fades into the ether, he knows this is final. There are no more teachers, no more safety nets. The last torch of the Jedi Order now burns within him alone. And as that light flickers in the Dagobah swamp, Return of the Jedi pivots from training to destiny. Despite knowing his next step, he's received Yoda's final blessing and knows his destiny, Luke feels overwhelmed. The task ahead feels impossible. He has to face his father, confront the Emperor, and somehow redeem a galaxy in despair. It's a burden no one can help him shoulder, and in this moment of doubt, his original mentor returns. Sir Alec Guinness's return to the role of Obi-Wan Kenobi was, by all accounts, a professional courtesy rather than a passion project. Guinness's later reflections in his autobiography cut right to the point. It's a rotten, dull little bit, but it would have been mean of me to refuse. Even so, Guinness's gravitas grounds the scene. His mere presence carries the weight of myth, legitimizing the moment and bridging Luke's journey back to where it all began. This conversation between Luke and Obi-Wan also resolves one of Star Wars' longest running points of contention, that infamous "from a certain point of view." It's a line often mocked as narrative gymnastics, but thematically it's far more interesting. It isn't about deceit, it's about perspective. Obi-Wan represents the old guard of the Jedi, a generation defined by rigid binaries, good and evil, Jedi and Sith, life and death. To him, Anakin Skywalker ceased to exist the moment he fell to darkness. But Luke sees something the old Jedi could not, a flicker of humanity still buried within the machine. To him, redemption is not naivete, it's a moral necessity. That tension between faith in others and fear of attachment defines Luke's conflict in Return of the Jedi. The old order warns him that compassion is dangerous, that it leads to the dark side. Luke, however, refuses to believe that love is a weakness. This clash of philosophies is the emotional spine of the entire finale. Obi-Wan's skepticism isn't born from malice, it's born from experience. He's seen what attachment can do, how love turned Anakin into Vader. For Luke, that same love is the key to bringing Anakin back. Their dialogue becomes a quiet duel of ideologies, stoicism versus empathy, and the outcome foreshadows everything that follows. Luke's compassion could doom him, or save him, and the film holds that question right up until its final act. It's also here that Obi-Wan confirms Yoda's final words: there is another Skywalker. The camera lingers on Luke as realization dawns. There's only one woman in the galaxy who fits. I mean, he only knows one woman anyway, so it doesn't really take a genius, but it still affects him deeply. It's a revelation that reshapes Luke's purpose. His burden grows, but so does his resolve. The ghosts have given him everything they can. The rest he must face alone. Before Luke departs for his destiny, the film pivots to the larger rebellion, a necessary reminder that this story, for all its mythic intimacy, still takes place against a galactic war. The Rebel Alliance prepares for its final strike, a desperate assault that will determine the fate of everything. And at the center of that scene stands Admiral Akbar, a fish-faced admiral whose design was chosen by Richard Marquand himself. I think it's good to tell kids that good people aren't necessarily good-looking people, and that bad people aren't necessarily ugly. That single design choice speaks volumes about the inclusivity baked into the Rebel ethos, a visual counterpoint to the Empire's fascist homogeneity. This scene also marks an important step forward in filmmaking. The holographic projection during the briefing, a small detail to our modern eyes, was one of cinema's earliest examples of computer-generated imagery. Having tested the technology in their work for Star Trek II, the fledgling Lucasfilm computer division rendered those shots of the Death Star painstakingly, one frame taking hours to process. Lucas's determination to push these effects foreshadow our present, where computers have transformed the language of film itself. Presiding over the briefing is Mon Mothma, the calm and authoritative leader of the Alliance, who now is one of the best Star Wars characters. If you told me that 10 years ago, I would have been looking for the hidden cameras. Portrayed with quiet dignity by Caroline Blackerston, Mothma commands attention with just a few lines. Ironically though, her presence came at a cost. The rousing speech she delivers was originally written for Leia, a move that, while adding much needed female representation to the franchise, inadvertently sidelines Leia from the leadership role she has already earned. It's a well-intentioned misstep that underscores how Return of the Jedi, for all of its progressive spirit, still struggled to balance its characters in the shadow of its own mythology. Thanks to the efforts of many Bothans, the Rebels learn of a critical vulnerability. The Emperor himself is aboard the second Death Star. Additionally, the station is not yet operational, meaning the rebellion has one narrow window to strike. But to reach the station, they'll have to disable the deflector shield generated from a base on the forest moon of Endor. The plan is elegantly suicidal: sneak through Imperial space in a stolen shuttle, infiltrate the shield generator, disable it, and clear the way for the fleet, led by General Lando Calrissian, to destroy the Death Star and the Empire once and for all. And in that moment, Han reveals he's leading the strike team. But notably for his character, he doesn't volunteer everyone else along with him. He lets his friends choose, and that small act of restraint speaks volumes. The crew's decision to follow him isn't driven by circumstance this time, it's driven by loyalty and love. Leia's inclusion in that team also reflects her own evolution. Once the mission leader and strategic mind of the rebellion, she now steps back in support of Han, not out of subservience, but trust. The dynamic between them has matured. She no longer needs to dominate to prove her strength, and Han no longer hides behind bravado to mask his fear of responsibility. Lando's arc, though brief, complements his theme beautifully. His redemption was the emotional hinge of the final act of Empire, and Jedi pays that off by promoting him to General. It's an implied but powerful bit of storytelling. We don't need to see his climb through the ranks to understand his transformation. The man who once hid behind deals and deniability now stands at the forefront of the war effort. Their brief exchange before the mission cements that parallel. Han handing over the Millennium Falcon, his prized possession, his home, his identity, is more than just a friendly gesture. It's a symbolic passing of the torch. And with that, the gang is back together one last time, boarding the stolen Imperial shuttle and heading deep into enemy territory. And look, even though The Empire Strikes Back is the superior film from nearly every standpoint, Return of the Jedi captures something that Empire never aimed to, the sheer joy of the team reunited. But Williams' score tempers that excitement. Instead of triumphant fanfare, we hear a low, mysterious motif, strings and brass that evoke both awe and unease. The heroes are flying into the lion's den, and deep down they can feel it. Meanwhile, on the Death Star, the chessboard is being set. The Emperor gives his final orders to Vader, arranging the Imperial fleet like a master strategist preparing for checkmate. But the writing here does something clever. It shows the Emperor's cunning not through exposition, but through omission. He withholds important information from Vader, sidestepping questions about the fleet's positioning and the rebel threat. His cryptic responses make the Emperor feel omniscient, a manipulator whose silence is more menacing than any monologue. But that same arrogance, that sense of untouchable control, also sows the seeds of his downfall. Rather than eliminating the threat swiftly, the Emperor chooses to stage manage his own victory, gambling the entire Empire on one grand, theatrical demonstration of power. In his mind, there is no risk. The rebellion is beneath him, their fate predetermined. And by presenting the Emperor this way, the film shows the fatal flaw of tyrants, not cruelty but hubris. It foreshadows the Emperor succumbing to his own vanity and overconfidence. The lure he sets for the rebels is also the one he sets for himself. By trying to control every outcome, he invites chaos. There's a certain word for the situation, but it's not coming to me. Back aboard the stolen Imperial shuttle, Han tries to keep spirits high. And here, the film sneaks in one of its most smallest but also most delightful character beats. Admiral Piet. Returning from Empire, Piet was once visibly terrified of Vader, a trembling subordinate desperate not to be choked to death for failure. Now, he looks bored, jaded, detached, almost indifferent to his superior. It's such a tiny but fascinating touch that underscores a larger idea. Tyranny breeds apathy. The longer one serves evil, the more routine it becomes. But it does add this subtle layer to how Jedi contrast the humanity of the rebels with the hollow machinery of the Empire. And for Luke, this moment feels like a mistake. Through the Force, he senses his father nearby, a presence that threatens to expose their mission before it even begins. That quiet recognition carries enormous tension. The rebels' plan depends on stealth, but Luke already knows the truth. They've been seen. It's a powerful moment, a mutual awareness between father and son that foreshadows the emotional tone for their eventual confrontation. When the rebels finally land on Endor, the change in environment feels like a breath of life after so much mechanical coldness. The forest moon, lush, green and teeming with life, represents renewal and balance. Narratively, the lush environment quickly turns hostile. The rebels encounter Imperial scouts, and while Han tries to knock them out, stealth has never been his strength. When two troopers flee on speeder bikes, Leia and Luke give chase, leading into one of the most kinetic and thrilling sequences in the entire trilogy. The speeder bike chase was Lucas's nod to his lifelong love of hot rods, speed and movement, but from a production standpoint, it was an immense challenge. Lucas's only instruction to concept artist Joe Johnston was, it should be like a land speeder motorcycle, and they need to fly through the trees at 200 miles an hour. From that simple note, Johnston and visual effects legend Dennis Muren had to invent a way to make it real. They began by filming a miniature forest built on a 4x8 foot plywood platform covered with green carpet and cardboard trees. Using a handheld camera, they shot miniature rocket bikes piloted by Luke and Leia action figures. But miniatures alone wouldn't capture the feeling of speed. The breakthrough came when Muren remembered a 16mm test he'd shot years earlier. Walking through a forest at 8 frames per second, when played back at normal speed, it felt like racing through the woods. To recreate that sensation on a grand scale, Muren recruited Garrett Brown, inventor of the Steadicam, to film in the redwoods of Samuel P. Taylor Park. Brown walked slowly through the forest, taking one frame every 1.3 seconds, moving about 7 feet between each shot. Every shake, flash, and bounce in the real forest was replicated in the miniature photography to blend the two seamlessly. In the final film, what makes the speeder bike chase so exhilarating isn't just the editing or the effects, it's the silence. There's no music, no grand John Williams cue urging us to feel awe or danger. Instead, the scene lets its rhythm speak through pure sound and velocity. It was a creative gamble that pays off spectacularly. The choice to drop the score came from sound designer Ben Burt, who suggested to Williams that the sequence might be more visceral without music at all. Williams agreed, trusting that the tension would come purely from the diegetic sound. That left Burt with the monumental task of turning sound effects into the emotional core of the scene. The result was an extraordinary piece of sound design. Burt laid recordings of real aircraft, P-38s, S-3 Vikings, and sped-up helicopters, blending them with the hiss of an air hammer to give the bikes their shrill, animalistic roar. Every whoosh, screech, and whine of the engine becomes its own percussive note. Narratively, the sequence serves a double purpose. It's not just spectacle, it's a showcase of Luke's growth. He leaps onto moving vehicles, fights mid-air, and deflects blaster fire with Jedi precision, a visual echo of his first training session aboard the Millennium Falcon. Back then, he fumbled with the remote, blindfolded and uncertain. Now, he's deflecting laser bolts at 200 miles per hour, calm and instinctive. It's a clear illustration of his evolution from farm boy to master of the Force. Leia gets her moment too. She outmaneuvers Imperial scouts, crashes spectacularly, and still survives. A small but important reminder that Leia's strength isn't limited to politics or command. But her crash leads the story into a tonal shift, from high-speed chase to fairy tale encounter. Knocked out from the chase, Leia awakens on the forest floor, disoriented, and finds herself face to face with a small furry creature holding a spear. It's an introduction that feels whimsical after the intensity of the chase, but thematically it works. Leia, the symbol of diplomacy and compassion, is the perfect character to first meet the Ewoks. Unable to communicate through words, she wins over the cautious little warrior Wicket through gestures and kindness. Once again, her empathy becomes her greatest weapon. Her young co-star, Warwick Davis, just 11 years old, helped bring that sweetness to life. Originally, the role was meant for Kenny Baker, the man inside R2-D2, but he fell ill before filming. Davis, a massive Star Wars fan, stepped in, and his enthusiasm became infectious. Carrie was so caring toward me. Whenever there was a pause, she asked if I needed anything. Could I have another cookie became my standard reply. But the experience wasn't all magic. The Ewok costumes were heavy, hot, and poorly ventilated. Many performers fainted under the heat of the studio lights, forcing the crew to distribute salt tablets between takes. For the cast, the Ewoks' playful spirit made the ordeal worth it. Davis later recalled that between takes, the Ewoks became notorious pranksters, tossing water balloons at crew members or sneaking up in costume to spook the crew. The atmosphere on set might have been physically draining, but it was also full of laughter, becoming a mirror of the story itself. Meanwhile, back on the Death Star, Vader defies his master's command out of desperation. He seeks an audience with the Emperor, and the scene that follows once again reinforces just how far he has fallen from the previous films. As Vader enters, the cinematography does something subtle but powerful. He's filmed from high angles and at a distance, no longer the towering figure who once dominated every frame. The space around him is cavernous, sterile, and overwhelming. The visual language tells us everything. He's no longer the predator, but the subordinate, dwarfed by the machinery of the Empire he helped create. Approaching his master, the dynamic is clear. Vader reports that a small rebel fleet has penetrated Imperial defenses, and, crucially, that Luke is with them. What's fascinating here is that the Emperor has not sensed this himself. It's a small but revealing detail. For a character presented as omnipotent, this gap in perception exposes a subtle flaw, a crack in his divine facade. Rather than acknowledge it, the Emperor redirects the conversation, belittling Vader's insight. The Emperor's inability to sense Luke parallels what Yoda warned Luke about earlier, that fear of loss, of failure, of being surpassed is the root of the dark side. In this moment, the Emperor embodies it completely. His ridicule of Vader isn't born from power, but insecurity. The visual design mirrors that psychology. The Emperor is framed in wide, symmetrical shots, sitting dead center in his throne, surrounded by empty space. Unlike Vader's shots, this emptiness doesn't make him look small, it makes him untouchable. He barely moves, exuding total command through stillness. We can't read his full expression, so he becomes inscrutable, godlike, unreachable. It's domination through absence. The Emperor's environment reveals something deeper about Lucas's worldview. The throne room, cold, sterile, and perched high above the galaxy, is a deliberate metaphor for political corruption and American militarism. Lucas had long said that Star Wars was partly his reaction to the Vietnam War and the erosion of public trust after Watergate. By the time Jedi was made, that critique had sharpened. The Emperor's command center, all sleek black surfaces and gleaming technological power, was intentionally modelled after the Oval Office. George at one point said, "What do you think this place looks like?" And I said, "Oh, you mean the Oval Office?" And he just sort of smiled, not committing to anything, but it was Nixon time, wasn't it? With Vader dismissed and the Emperor's web tightening, the story cuts back to our heroes, who are, fittingly, about to fall into a just can't say it yet. Searching for Leia, the rebels find themselves caught, literally in a net, thanks to Chewie's impulsive appetite. Surrounded by spear-wielding Ewoks, Han and Luke quickly realise that brute force isn't going to cut it. Their reactions are priceless, and the scene features a wide array of facial performances by Harrison Ford. And, alright, I'm gonna have to talk about this. Context changes everything. It's like watching an old interview where a celebrity seems perfectly normal, until you learn about the police report 3 years later. Suddenly, every smile looks guilty. Likewise, knowing what we know now about Harrison Ford's reluctance to return for this film, his performance reads very differently. At this point in his career, Ford was untouchable. Empire Strikes Back, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Blade Runner, 3 icons in 3 years. Coming back to a character he thought should have died heroically in Empire, it's no surprise he's a little checked out here. I thought the script was a letdown after the first 2, and Harrison wanted a heroic death and really didn't want to do the script that was written. That's not to say that Ford is bad here, far from it. When Han's given emotional beats, Ford nails them. But most of the time, Han's reduced to comic relief, mugging through scenes that don't give him the emotional weight he had before. Thankfully, the story throws him and the others a lifeline, literally in the form of 3PO. Emerging from the bushes, the Ewoks immediately mistake the golden droid for a god. It's absurd, a bit too silly, and yeah, let's talk about the Ewoks. Few elements in Return of the Jedi have sparked as much debate as these tiny, teddy bear-like creatures. At the time, they were hugely controversial, seen by many as the moment Star Wars sold out. Critics accused Lucas of prioritizing toy sales over storytelling, turning a gritty intergalactic rebellion into a fuzzy merchandising opportunity. Through today's lens, the Ewoks are often seen as the first warning sign of the franchise's commercial instincts overpowering its creative ones. However, the Ewoks work. Not perfectly, and not without issues, but they work. I understand the initial frustration. You go from the operatic tragedy of The Empire Strikes Back to a bunch of teddy bears taking down stormtroopers with rocks and sticks. It's a tonal whiplash. And yes, Wookiees would have made more sense narratively and thematically. But, taken on their own terms, the Ewoks serve a purpose. They embody the romantic ideal that Star Wars was always built on, that innocence and heart can triumph over power and machinery. I'll admit, when I was younger, I hated the Ewoks. I thought they were childish, silly, and emblematic of everything wrong with Jedi. Granted, this was during my Zack Snyder phase, when I thought slow motion punches and grim tone automatically meant artistic depth, which is a story for another franchise. But still, the Ewoks didn't work for me. Now, I see them differently. Their simplicity is their strength. Williams' score for them, playful yet heartfelt, might honestly be one of his most underrated Star Wars compositions. The Ewoks ground the film in a kind of innocent sincerity that the saga had started to drift away from. Star Wars was always meant to be for kids. That was Lucas's mission from the start, to inspire imagination in a generation burnt out by cynicism and disillusioned by post-Vietnam America. And the Ewoks represent that hope. Beneath their furry exteriors, they're also a statement. Small, underestimated forces rising up against a technologically superior empire. It's classic Star Wars wrapped in cuddly fur. Brought to the Ewok village, the heroes soon discover they're on the dinner menu for a ceremonial feast. Leia's pleas fail to reach their furry hosts, even through 3PO's translation. So, Luke intervenes, not with violence, but with spectacle. Using the Force to levitate 3PO, he convinces the Ewoks that their deity is displeased. It's a funny, clever scene, but it also once more marks a major turning point for Luke. This is Luke as a true Jedi, calm, centered, and resourceful. No anger, no recklessness, just control. This moment pays off Yoda's lesson about patience and composure, where once he lifted stones, now he manipulates belief itself, transforming faith into salvation. Freed from their predicament, the heroes later gather around a campfire as 3PO dramatically recounts their past adventures. It's a cute, if slightly self-congratulatory scene, one that turns the Ewoks from potential threats into eager allies. From there, the story slows for a needed intimate moment between the main characters. With the group reminiscing, Luke steps away, heavy with the knowledge of what's to come. Leia joins him, and in one quiet conversation, Luke reveals everything. Vader is his father, Leia is his sister. Their destinies are intertwined. I guess Alderaan is the Alabama of the Star Wars universe. Wait, can I say that? I'm not actually American. Alderaan is the Queensland of the Star Wars universe. It's one thing to have Darth Vader tell Luke he's his father, but it's another thing to have Luke tell Leia she's his sister and that Darth Vader is their father. That really gets hard to swallow. Carrie Fisher felt the same. I'd have laughed on camera if Mark had told me for the first time. It would have been like, Carrie, your dad isn't Eddie Fisher, it's Hitler. Even decades later, Fisher still wasn't convinced. So this is my father who tortured me in that little room, but this is George, and this is the kind of amazing fairy tale myth that he's constructed. It's like opera, and we accept it because we enjoy the relationships. On that level, it's poignant. Luke's confession isn't just a plot dump, it's an act of vulnerability. He knows he might not survive his confrontation with Vader, and this may be his last chance to tell Leia the truth. He has learned to speak with calm certainty, a sign that he has transcended the emotional turmoil of his earlier journey. By opening up to Leia, this is Luke's moment of inner enlightenment, the point where he fully accepts his lineage, his responsibility, and the spiritual challenge ahead. It's the final transformation he needs before facing the Emperor and fulfilling his destiny as a Jedi. It's also Luke's full circle moment of selflessness. He's willing to sacrifice his life, not for glory, but to redeem what's left of his father's soul. He finally understands that being a Jedi isn't about heroics or victory, it's about compassion even in the face of death. Leia, in turn, reflects that same compassion back. She accepts his revelation, doesn't question it, and immediately understands his reasoning. The visual language reinforces their contrast. Leia bathed in soft light, Luke cloaked in shadow, in an interesting yin and yang parallel. She's the symbol of hope and continuity, while he stands on the brink between salvation and corruption. Their farewell is understated but powerful. Leia's quiet acceptance of Luke's departure says more than any speech could. When Han arrives, confused and hurt by her distance, Leia's instinct is to retreat, to carry the burden alone, as she always has. But then she opens up, finally allowing herself to lean on someone else. For a scene that could have been just pure exposition, it ends up doing what the best Star Wars moments always do, grounding mythic stakes in human emotion. It sets the stage perfectly: the war for the galaxy, the battle for souls, and the final test of Luke Skywalker. It's here where I'll stop following the film scene for scene. To do so would force me to switch back and forth between 3 different important stages and would leave the analysis confused and clunky. So, to fix this, I'm going to split the rest of the film into 2 sections, before returning to the conclusion. So, we'll focus on the battles in space and on the ground in one section, and the battle for Vader's soul in the other. So, let's start with the battle for Endor and the Death Star. The next morning, the Rebels and the Ewoks head toward the Imperial shield generator. Their mission clear: destroy the station, bring down the shield, and give the fleet above a chance to destroy the Death Star and the Empire once and for all. Meanwhile, with the Rebels gathered, Lando leads the assault team into hyperspace, trusting that by the time they arrive, Han, Leia, and the others will have completed their objective. Back on the forest moon, however, patience isn't exactly an Ewok strength. Before Han and Leia can even decide on a plan of attack, one overeager Ewok leaps into action, stealing a speeder bike and immediately alerting nearby troopers. To achieve the comedic image of the Ewok dangling behind the bike as it tears through the forest, the production team physically tilted the speeder upward on its rear struts, allowing the performer in the costume to hang mid-air. A simple but clever bit of practical filmmaking. But the tension is palpable, as the audience already knows, thanks to the Emperor's earlier gloating, that this is all part of his master plan. The heroes are walking straight.
It's a trap!
Ah damn, he beat me to it. Ah well. For a brief moment, the Rebels gain the upper hand, capturing the Imperials, which, side note, remains my favourite gag in the Family Guy spoof.
No, please! Shut up! And after he's dead, cut off his face and wear it as your face! Please! I've had it up to here with Ewoks. Now stab him and wear his face!
However, they're quickly surrounded. Meanwhile, up in space, Lando and the Rebel fleet make the same grim discovery. The moment Williams' score swells into that soaring crescendo, only to collapse into dissonant dread as the trap is sprung, is masterful. The space battle that follows was, at the time, the most effects-heavy sequence ever attempted. One shot alone, codenamed SB-19, contained more than 70 individual elements. The Death Star, the Falcon, Star Destroyers, dozens of TIE Fighters, and every streaking laser blast, all painstakingly composited one layer at a time. For ILM, the sequence wasn't just a technical challenge, it was a war of attrition. But the result is breathtaking. While the original Death Star battle is iconic, Jedi's finale blows it out of the water. The dogfights are tighter, the editing faster, and the camera feels alive, weaving between ships as if it's another pilot in the fight. It truly feels like the culmination of a trilogy, a cinematic symphony of motion, light, and sound. Then comes the Emperor's final twist. The Death Star is fully operational. What seemed like a half-built fortress is, in fact, a loaded gun. The Rebels are slaughtered as lasers rain down upon them. Yet, amidst the chaos, Lando's conviction never wavers. His faith in Han and Leia is absolute. So much so that he convinces Admiral Akbar to hold their ground instead of retreating.
Our cruisers can't repel firepower of that magnitude.
And we'll have that shield down. We've got to give him more time.
Back on Endor, Things aren't going smoothly either. The rebels are captured and surrounded by hundreds of Imperial troops, until, of course, the Ewoks rally and launch their ambush. Filming that chaos was its own kind of war. Marquand was juggling 40 Ewoks, 130 stormtroopers, and multiple rebel extras, all crammed into a dense, uneven forest. It was mayhem. You'd tell the Ewoks to run, hide, and disappear, and then you couldn't find them again. Narratively, this is the point where Jedi's most common criticism resurfaces. How can a tribe of Stone Age teddy bears overpower an elite military empire? The answer lies less in logic and more in allegory.
Size matters not. Look at me. Judge me by my size, do you?
Lucas designed the Battle of Endor as an explicit reflection of the Vietnam War. The technologically superior US military outmatched by guerrilla fighters who understood their environment. Just as the Viet Cong used the jungle to their advantage, the Ewoks used the forest itself as their weapon, setting traps, ambushing patrols, and weaponizing the Empire's arrogance. And yet, for a film directed at younger audiences, Lucas doesn't sugarcoat the cost of rebellion. I don't care what anyone says, the shot of the Ewok desperately trying to wake his mate is the most devastating thing I've ever seen. Come and see, eat your heart out. Saving Private Ryan was a nice day out compared to this. Lucas made sure that even young audiences understand that war, even in a fairy tale galaxy, comes with loss. Amid the chaos, Han and Leia's brief character arcs crystallize. Han, now a true leader, risks everything to keep the team moving. Leia, shot and wounded, still refuses to give up, her courage and compassion galvanizing those around her.
I love you.
I know.
Gaining the upper hand, Han uses a stolen AT-ST walker to trick the Imperials into opening the bunker door before blowing it sky high. It's classic Han Solo, clever, reckless, and heroic in equal measure. With the shield finally destroyed, Lando and the fleet launch their final assault. What follows is pure cinema. The Falcon dives through the Death Star's labyrinthine tunnels, dodging debris and fireballs as Lando and Wedge close in on the reactor core. It's edge-of-your-seat filmmaking, and even though it mirrors the climax of the original Star Wars, it feels grander, faster, more dangerous, more desperate. The camera rushes through the structure like it's alive, capturing the sense that everything, the rebellion, the Empire, the trilogy itself, is reaching its breaking point. Although, if there's one letdown, and I can't believe I'm saying this, it's Williams' score. While still exhilarating, it's largely a reprise of a motif from the original film. A bit of a if it ain't broke, don't fix it choice. It works, but it does reinforce the criticism that Jedi plays it safe rather than forging something new. Still, as the Death Star explodes and Lando and Wedge narrowly escape the explosion, it's impossible not to feel the awe. The space battle remains one of ILM's crowning achievements, a technical and emotional crescendo that closes out the trilogy with grandeur, spectacle, and heart. In the quiet aftermath of battle, Han and Leia finally get a moment to breathe, and to be human again. Han, worried for Luke's safety, tries to comfort Leia, but Leia doesn't need it. She knows he's safe. Her calm assurance, underscored by the faint echo of the Force within her, is proof of her own latent connection, the other Skywalker Yoda spoke of. To Han though, that calm is confusing. He mistakes it for affection. For Luke, his face softens as he misreads her stillness, believing she loves someone else. And yet, what follows is one of the most tender moments in Han Solo's entire arc. Instead of resorting to jealousy or bravado, Han accepts it. If Leia loves another, then so be it. For the first time in his life, Han's instinct isn't to fight, but to let go. It's an understated but powerful act of selflessness, proof that the smuggler who once cared only for himself has learned to put others first. Leia, who began the trilogy as a fiercely independent leader burdened by responsibility, finally allows herself a moment of vulnerability and love. Leia also finds what she's been denying herself for so long: happiness. The war is over. Her fight, built on hope and sacrifice, has succeeded. Surrounded by friends and bound now by family, Leia finally has peace. Han, the rogue turned hero, finds a purpose beyond survival. Together, they embody the trilogy's moral heart: love, trust, and the courage to believe in something greater than yourself.
He's my brother.
But not everyone's fate is certain. The Death Star may be gone, but the true battle, the one between light and dark, is still being waged within its fiery heart. Deep inside, Luke Skywalker faces the Emperor, his father, and the ultimate test of everything he's learned. When we last saw Luke, he had left the safety of the Ewok village to surrender himself to the Empire, an act that on the surface looks suicidal, but in reality reflects his deepest belief, that redemption is possible. This is where Obi-Wan's famous phrase "from a certain point of view" takes on new meaning. The Jedi see Anakin as lost, a failure better buried than faced. The Sith see Vader as a tool, a weapon stripped of empathy. Only Luke, who has suffered directly at Vader's hand multiple times, chooses to see the man behind the mask. That act of empathy is what separates Luke from both the traditional Jedi and Sith. Vader's reaction is telling. The more Luke insists on seeing his humanity, the more Vader retreats behind ritual and rhetoric. This makes Vader less a monster and more a prisoner, trapped in the armor, in his servitude to the Emperor, and in his own self-loathing. His attempt to change the subject, complementing Luke's growth as a Jedi, feels like a desperate deflection. He can't face the truth his son offers, so he clings to the only identity he has left. Visually, Marquand stages this reunion like an opera. The pair rarely face each other directly. Instead, they often turn towards the horizon, their profiles framed against the cold metal of the landing platform. The camera's distance is a brilliant bit of visual storytelling. The physical space between them mirrors the emotional chasm Luke is trying to cross.
Then my father is truly dead.
Luke's final line to his father lands like a challenge more than a farewell. It's both a jab and a seed. He wants to provoke self-reflection, to force the man inside the machine to question whether there's still something left worth saving. What makes the exchange so powerful is how it inverts The Empire Strikes Back. Then, Vader reached out to Luke, asking him to join him. Now, Luke reaches out to Vader. Both extend a hand, and both are refused. But where Vader's offer was about domination, Luke's is about compassion. As Luke is taken away to face the Emperor, the silence that lingers with Vader is important. For the first time, we see him hesitate, the faintest crack in his emotional walls. Luke's words have done what no weapon could. They've made Vader doubt his master, and perhaps himself. Escorted by Vader, Luke steps into the Devil's Lair, completing a journey that began in the cave on Dagobah. There, Luke faced a vision of evil born from within. Here, he faces an evil incarnate. In Empire, Luke entered the innermost cave of his hero's journey, clinging to his weapon and his fear. Now, he enters unarmed, resolute, and spiritually bare. Yet, paradoxically, this is the most vulnerable he's ever been. He's in the heart of the Empire, surrounded by death and temptation, and his faith alone is his weapon. The Emperor greets him like a serpent welcoming prey, polite, almost affectionate, yet dripping with contempt. For him, Luke's capture is the end of the story. He's merely savouring the final act. That hubris, the same flaw that destroyed the Jedi and will soon destroy him, defines the sequence. Luke, meanwhile, shows tremendous restraint. He rejects the Emperor's flattery with calm, refusing to bow or even kneel. But the scene's power lies in how the visuals contradict his composure. Cinematographer Alan Hume frames Luke from above, shrinking him beneath the towering shadows of Vader and the Emperor. The Emperor, often shot from a distance in previous scenes, now dominates the frame, crossing the physical space to loom over Luke as the camera tilts into a low angle. Luke has stepped fully into the belly of the beast. And I'm just going to say it again, McDiarmid is extraordinary here. He doesn't just play evil, he enjoys it, like a maestro savouring every note of his symphony. The way he hisses the word friend is particularly brilliant.
I assure you, we are quite safe from your friends here.
McDiarmid noticed that Kasdan's script had the Emperor using the term often, so he twisted it into mockery, as if the very concept of friendship is an alien joke to him. The Emperor believes in himself, while Luke believes in others. The Emperor's creed is that power is meant to be taken, that survival belongs to the strong. Luke's entire journey, by contrast, has been about rejecting that idea, proving that hope and connection can achieve what isolation cannot. And that's precisely where the Emperor strikes. Sensing Luke's vulnerability, he begins his temptation, not through promises of wealth or vengeance, but through fear for others. He reveals that the Rebel fleet's attack, which Luke believed to be their great victory, is already known to him. The Emperor doesn't tempt Luke with greed, he tempts him with love. It's the cruelest and most effective form of manipulation, weaponizing Luke's greatest strength against him. The Emperor knows that compassion can become desperation when twisted by fear. Luke's real confrontation with evil begins the moment the Emperor's trap is sprung. For the first time, Luke's belief in his friends, his defining strength, begins to waver. Just as he would risk everything to save them, the Emperor knows that this empathy is also his greatest vulnerability. The Emperor revels in it. He exposes Luke's fear, twists it, and feeds it back to him with relish.
Your overconfidence is your weakness.
Your faith in your friends is yours.
To the Emperor, Luke's fall is inevitable. It's a pattern written into the bloodline. Visually, it's all played with restraint. The scene unfolds almost entirely through static shots and simple cuts. There's no over-the-top flourishes, no frantic camera movement. The battle here is internal. Luke, the Emperor, and Vader form a triangle of stillness and tension, each framed as if locked in their own moral gravity. And so, when Luke finally ignites his lightsaber, it's not an act of courage, it's one of despair. For all his training, all his composure, Luke lashes out in anger. The Emperor smiles. The moment Luke strikes, the cycle begins to repeat. The son mirrors the sins of the father. Yet, in a moment of clarity, Luke pulls himself back. He extinguishes his blade. For a brief instant, Williams' Force theme swells softly, a reprieve of purity, a breath of light in the darkness.
Obi-Wan has taught you well.
One time is funny, two times it's fucking annoying, no?
He lowers his weapon not out of fear, but out of faith. Faith in his father's buried humanity. Vader strikes regardless, but even that act carries weight. For the first time, Vader fights not as a hunter, but as a man clinging to his master's approval. This is reinforced in a quiet moment underneath the Emperor's throne. Vader, sensing his son's compassion, follows in his master's footsteps, using it to twist his son into hate. This is it. Luke is on the precipice between two ideologies.
Sister, if you will not turn to the dark side, then perhaps she will.
Those words shatter Luke's restraint. His love, the very thing that defines him, becomes his downfall. In a flurry of rage, he attacks, hammering at Vader with unbridled fury. By doing so, Luke is finally pushing back against his enemy, but it is not out of what Luke aims to stand for, so the victory is tainted in eerie and haunting music. Backing his father down, Luke returns the favor, cutting his hand off to reveal the machinery inside. The Emperor's laughter pierces the room, triumphant. And then, silence. Vader is defeated, his hand severed. Luke stands over him, panting, his lightsaber poised for the killing blow. Luke has seemingly failed, becoming everything he swore to destroy, until he sees it. The severed, mechanical stump where his hand once was. The same hand that once severed his own. The visual symmetry is devastating. For the first time, Luke truly sees himself in his father. If he continues down this path, he will become the very thing he's fighting. This is the climax of Luke's atonement with the Father. The stage in Campbell's journey where the hero must confront not the villain, but the shadow within himself. And the blocking reinforces this perfectly. Luke now stands over Vader, framed from a low angle, while Vader lies beneath him, shot from high above. It is the only time in the trilogy where Luke is visually positioned as the dominant figure over his father. But that power is the temptation, the threshold he must cross.
Never. I'll never turn to the dark side.
Luke's real victory comes not from defeating Vader, but from recognizing what that victory would turn him into. By throwing away his lightsaber, he refuses the cycle of violence, the myth of destiny, and the Emperor's false dichotomy. It's not that Luke is stronger than his father was, but that he finally gained the wisdom his father never had, the strength to stop fighting. It also speaks to something Luke has carried within him from the very beginning: compassion. Long before he tried to lift an X-Wing, long before he understood the Force, Luke's defining strength was always his instinct to care for others. This is the moment that recontextualizes his entire journey. Despite his Jedi training, despite Yoda's lessons about patience and restraint, Luke's true power isn't something he learned, it's something he already had. And this is where Jedi subtly reframes what it means to be a hero in Campbell's monomyth. Luke's refusal to kill Vader isn't just an act of mercy, it's, in the hero's journey terms, his apotheosis. The spiritual realization that heroism isn't rooted in power, mastery, or combat, but in empathy. It's the understanding that the greatest victory is the refusal to perpetuate violence. Luke doesn't become a Jedi because he defeats his enemy. He becomes one because he refuses to. In that moment, he transcends the narrow doctrines of both Jedi and Sith and discovers the deeper truth at the heart of Campbell's cycle, that the hero's ultimate boon is not strength, but the wisdom to choose compassion even when hatred would be easier. Now for the Emperor, he's not a massive fan of rejection, and resorts to raw destruction. He treats his enemy to the ultimate power of the Sith, using his lightning ability to destroy his foe, a physical manifestation of his hatred. The sound, designed by Ben Burt using vintage equipment from the set of Frankenstein's 1931 laboratory, evokes that mad scientist origins of the monster genre. As the lightning engulfs Luke, Vader watches. The framing is incredible. The Emperor on one side, Luke on the other. Vader's masked face caught in the flickering blue storm between them. And then, the impossible happens. The machine chooses compassion. Anakin looks between his master and his son, between servitude and salvation, and finally acts. He lifts the Emperor, absorbing the full wrath of the lightning, sacrificing himself to save the boy who never stopped believing in him. It's a redemption earned not through power, but through love. In that moment, Luke's faith is rewarded. The son saves the father by giving him the one thing the galaxy never did: forgiveness. Luke began his journey longing to become his father, and ends it by restoring the man his father once was. His triumph isn't measured in enemies defeated, but in a soul redeemed. With the Emperor defeated and the second Death Star meeting the same fiery fate as the first, Luke drags his dying father through the chaos to a waiting shuttle. Luke still clings to hope, desperate to save the man he spent 3 films trying to reach. But Anakin knows it's too late. His redemption came at a cost, and it must be met with acceptance. His final wish is simple: to see his son with his own eyes, unmasked, unfiltered, unchained. The moment Luke removes the helmet is one of the most powerful in the entire saga. For 3 films, the mask has symbolized terror, oppression, and the cold machinery of the Empire. Now, stripped away, it reveals a frail, broken man, scarred, wary, but human again.
I'll not leave you here. I've got to save you.
You already have.
The orchestral shift by Williams is nothing short of genius. The Imperial March dissolves into a delicate reprise of the Force theme, woodwind and strings intertwining to mirror Anakin's transition from darkness into light. The dark side seek to conquer death. The Jedi learn to embrace it. In accepting the end, Anakin reclaims his humanity. The mask's removal is symbolic of that release. Luke finally sees his father's true face, and the man behind the machine is everything he'd hoped for: flawed, human, and capable of love. The performance from Sebastian Shaw gives the character unexpected gravitas. Shaw brings quiet dignity to the role, a man at peace with his mistakes, grateful for one final moment of grace. His delivery balances regret and serenity, and in mere minutes, he gives closure to a near 9-hour journey. After the Death Star explodes, Luke doesn't join the celebrations just yet. Instead, we cut to a somber epilogue. Luke, alone, standing before his father's funeral pyre. Now, the fire becomes a symbol of purification, the destruction of the machine and the release of the spirit within. However, this emotional scene wasn't in the original script. It was added after assistant editor Dwayne Dunham asked Lucas what became of Vader's body. Lucas, forgetting this detail, was initially pretty pissed off when Dunham brought it up, but later realised it was necessary, emotionally and symbolically. Filmed at Skywalker Ranch during post-production, the quiet simplicity of the shot gives the saga its emotional closure. As the fire fades, the tone shifts into celebration. Fireworks burst in the sky, and the Ewok village below erupts into joyous crowds marking the end of an empire. The heroes embrace. Leia and Han share a moment of relief, Chewie and Lando reminisce, and the Ewoks dance to a rhythm of freedom. After 3 films of rebellion, fear, and loss, the fairy tale finds its ending. Evil is vanquished, love is rekindled, and peace, at least for now, is restored. But Luke's journey isn't about victory parades. He steps away from the celebrations, and instead gazes into the distance. And there, illuminated in blue light, stand the ghosts of Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Anakin. By completing his hero's journey, Luke has proven all 3 of them wrong in the best possible way. In that image, the son beside the spirits of his fathers, the myth comes full circle. Luke has completed the hero's journey. He left home seeking adventure and instead found wisdom. Luke's victory is not born from the Force, but from compassion, from his unshakable belief that anyone, no matter how lost, can choose to be good again. That's the lasting message of the Star Wars trilogy, and of myth itself. These stories remind us to stand firm in our convictions, to find courage when hope falters. Star Wars endures because its message is eternal, that goodness, empathy, and love aren't naive. They're the hardest and most powerful choices we can make. George Lucas loves to tinker. Like the other 2 films in the original trilogy, Return of the Jedi wasn't immune to his perpetual urge to adjust, improve, and perfect what was already iconic. There were shots he wanted to include but couldn't, effects that fell short, and musical choices that didn't match his imagination. When digital technology finally caught up to his ambition, Lucas dove back in, first with the 1997 special editions, and later with the 2004 DVDs and 2011 Blu-ray releases. Each version brought new changes, ranging from clever improvements to outright head-scratches. So, let's start with the fun one, the infamous musical number. Lucas was never fond of Lapti Nek, the song that originally played during Jabba's palace scene. He wanted something livelier, a real showstopper. So, in 1997, the sequence was overhauled. The original Sy Snootles puppet was replaced with a fully CGI version. alongside new creatures and a new song, Jedi Rocks.
On second thoughts, let's not go to Camelot. It is a silly place. Right.
Many fans hated this, and while I get why, I don't mind it. Yes, the close-ups of Snoodles' lips are nightmare fuel, and yes, I'd prefer not to see down the tonsils of this monstrosity against God, but the sequence has energy. It's more vibrant, more chaotic, and feels truer to the seedy cabaret vibe of Jabba's court. The original puppet lacked any life, barely able to move its mouth. This new version, while cartoonish, at least moves. It's not essential, but it's fun. I don't mind a bit of camp. So far, I would say largely harmless tinkering, but then we reached the Sarlacc pit. The Sarlacc got a digital upgrade, sprouting a giant beak and writhing tentacles in the 1997 re-release. While the added CGI in the darker, shadowy throne room worked, here, under Tatooine's harsh two suns, the CGI sticks out like a sore thumb. The original design, a simple, gaping mouth surrounded by sand, was terrifying because of its simplicity. You didn't need to see it move to know it was deadly. Adding a cartoonish beak doesn't make it scarier, just sillier. It's a perfect example of Lucas's later philosophy. If technology can change something, it should. And yet, the beauty of Star Wars was always its limitations. How those constraints forced the filmmakers to innovate. The Sarlacc didn't need to move. Our imagination did that for it. Additionally, in the 2011 Blu-ray, Lucas added digital eyelid blinks to the Ewoks. And it's fine. The effect is subtle enough to give them more life without turning them into a CGI monstrosity. Out of all the minor tweaks, this might be the least offensive. A small, welcome touch that helps bridge the gap between costume and creature. Now for the big ones. In the 2011 Blu-ray release, Lucas made what is arguably his most infamous change, giving Darth Vader dialogue doing Luke's torture. In the original cut, Anakin's redemption is conveyed entirely through silence. The camera lingers on his mask, the lightning flashes across his face, and you feel the conflict inside him, purely through pacing, sound design, and performance. It's one of blockbuster cinema's greatest examples of visual storytelling, the moment where the machine regains its soul. But Lucas, perhaps fearing audiences wouldn't get it, added a shout. It's the kind of change that feels like Lucas no longer trusted his audience, or his own original instincts. Not every alteration was misguided though. In the same 2004 release, Sebastian Shaw's eyebrows were digitally removed from the unmasking scene, a surprisingly effective fix. After, being burnt alive, it made no sense for Vader to still have a full set of brows. The change adds a layer of realism and makes him appear more damaged, fragile, and otherworldly. It's one of the few updates that truly improves continuity and tone. The ending montage also received a major overhaul. In the original cut, the celebration on Endor felt a bit small, our heroes dancing with teddy bears while the galaxy's liberation went unseen. Later editions expanded this to include Coruscant, Tatooine, Naboo, and Cloud City, visually reinforcing that the entire galaxy is rejoicing. It's a welcome expansion, gave weight to the rebellion's victory, and it also feels like Lucas giving a subtle middle finger to the people who hate the Gungans. The new music also works beautifully, more sweeping and majestic than the original Ewok song. It feels like the end of a galactic myth, not just a campfire party. And then we get to the biggest change of all, replacing Sebastian Shaw's Force Ghost with Hayden Christensen. Lucas justified the swap as a way to unify the two trilogies, arguing that Anakin's spirit should appear as he was before his fall to the dark side. On paper, it makes sense. When Vader dies, so does the corrupted persona, leaving only the version of Anakin who was once good. In practice, it's more complicated. While Christensen's appearance helps link the trilogies thematically, it also undercuts Luke's emotional journey. The power of the original ending was seeing the man Luke redeemed. the same face he unmasked moments earlier. By replacing him with a younger version, it feels less like a father's forgiveness and more like brand synergy. It felt cynical, less about myth-making, more about marketing. Ultimately, the original trilogy has undergone so many revisions that the original versions themselves feel almost mythical, a relic buried beneath layers of digital varnish. To me, these edits reflect something deeply human about Lucas himself. He's a man forever chasing perfection, never satisfied, always refining. It's easy to mock, but there's also something tragic about it. Star Wars was never great because it was flawless. It was great because it felt alive, messy, ambitious, sincere, and endlessly imaginative. In his pursuit to perfect the myth, Lucas may have forgotten what made it mythic in the first place. Myths aren't meant to be remastered, they're meant to be remembered. Post-production on Jedi went right to the edge. Lucas, exhausted, flew to Sri Lanka to help Spielberg kick off Temple of Doom. He must be totally fried. That burnout bled into the work. Lucas later admitted that Temple of Doom reflected that darker headspace. Jedi arrived into a swirl of commerce, skepticism, and expectation. Internally, Lucas remained ambivalent. Relieved to finish a decade-long odyssey, still wishing for different choices, yet broadly satisfied that it worked. For Lucas, the cost of finishing the trilogy was personal. His divorce finalized, he talked openly about stepping back, putting family first, and paying the real price of success, not in money, but in your soul. The coda was bittersweet for Richard Marquand. After Jedi, he chased smaller, earthbound dramas and a UK-based life, before an abrupt illness and stroke ended his life at just 49. His passing underscored how human, how mortal, this industrial miracle had always been. In the years after, Lucas didn't retire so much as reconfigure. He shepherded Ewok films and cartoons, produced for friends, and invested in the digital future he knew he'd need before returning to the galaxy far, far away. The special editions proved the appetite hadn't faded. Jurassic Park confirmed the tech could finally meet the dream. When Lucas spoke later of getting the joy back, he meant something simple and circular, seeing children light up the way they once did in 1977. The myth remained intact, not because they were perfect films, but because they carried perfect feelings. And that's where Return of the Jedi ultimately lands. It is messy, compromised, argued over, and enduring. It ends a war, completes an arc, and gives its central promise back to the audience. That compassion can be stronger than power, that friendship can outlast fear, that redemption is a choice available until the very last moment. 40 years on, the last image still speaks. Masters at peace, a son who chose mercy, and a galaxy that dances because hope, against odds, against tyranny, won. Alright, hey everyone, thank you for watching my video. Happy holidays, hope you're having a nice break. It is currently 3 PM and I have been awake now 34 hours straight to get this video finished in time. And I've loved every single second of it. It's been such a blast. I'm very tired. I'm not sure it's going to come across in my voice. But yeah, I wanted to get this video done before Christmas, just to release this nice big video before the end of the year, just as a nice little curtain closer. Yeah, so yeah, I'm very proud of it. I've put a lot of work into it, and I hope that the passion that I've put into it has come across to you guys. Yeah, that means the world to me. Probably too late to say now, but if you're still here, I would really love a like and a subscribe. It means the world to me, especially as a small YouTuber. But yeah, this year's been a very productive year. I've decided to make some changes to the channel, and that's worked really well. And yeah, I'm trying to find that balance between making these bigger videos and making those shorter videos, making sure that I can get out not only just consistent content, but also content that I am both proud of and want to share with you guys. Yeah, I'm just really happy where this channel is going, and yeah, just want to keep on growing. But yeah, that's about it. Probably not going to do another Star Wars video for a while. I'll do the prequels next, but yeah, maybe just a little break from Star Wars. I'm a bit Star Warsed out right now. I'm ready for bed. But yeah, that's all for now. There'll be more videos coming out soon. Have a happy holidays, and yeah, stay safe. I'll see you guys in the next one.